push that. It might be just a total coincidence.
I tweaked it because very difficult at this point of time to say like everything is just.
I love your title. I love it. I have a couple of cases that appear rare, and at the beginning everybody got excited, but then this is so spreaded that you don't know whether it was by chance you got it, right?
That's it. Yeah,
Good evening, everyone. How are you all?
Good evening, sir. Yes,
Can you
yes,
see
sir.
me?
Yes, sir, I can see you.
Okay.
Hi Rajesh, how are you?
Hi, Arsi. How are you? Hi,
But,
Karan.
yes, how are you? I send you a big virtual hug.
Yes,
How's
yes.
that?
Yeah,
My
Professor
old pal
Shefali,
from Miami.
you can share your screen and try. And
Hi Shefali.
Hello,
Good
sir.
evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
hi, sir. Hi, Pramod sir.
Up.
Yeah, your screen is your
Dr. Pal
mic
is
is.
also joined.
Yeah. So
1 sec.
You're in a bit of
You'll allow-
advantage. You guys know each other.
I think it's good morning for you, Dr. Torres, right? And
yeah.
Dr. David,
Yes.
good morning.
I
It's a
brought
big
my
day.
coffee here. I
Good
brought
morning
my
here.
coffee.
Good evening here. Yes.
Yeah. I'm sharing. Can see?
Yeah. Very well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very
Can
well.
I
Very-
see your video? Can I just see your video? Can I just check it if it works?
Yeah,
Once
yeah,
one
yeah.
video. One.
Do we have money to pay for those treatments in India?
Yes.
We don't have money, but we have humanitarian access program.
Okay.
We have.
And what was it
No, sir.
approved? Because I heard that only Brazil has this available. Is that true?
You're talking about remdesivir?
For
No.
the-
You know the SMA treatments, no.
Oh,
For
SMA.
Zolgensma, for the one that is a
Yeah.
one-time injection.
Yeah. We have given to one patient. The other one, I was selected, but has developed fever and is admitted. So otherwise was due for this month end. So we have to just see.
The pharma is giving it on a compassionate ground now. So one of my patients also got selected this time. So
you're lucky. You're lucky. I haven't
yeah,
been
that's
selected.
it. That is after 6-7 trials. This
Well,
is the
that's
first
a
time
good thing that you mentioned, because I was going to give up.
I stopped sharing. It's okay.
Yeah. Lokesh, you are there?
Yeah.
Lokesh, I think he is.
Vinay, I'm there.
Yeah.
Actually, I logged in through the mobile. I've done it earlier through the same device. Shouldn't be a problem.
So you want to try your slide presentation, or you don't want to?
No, that's fine.
Dr. Gulati, I have one small request to make. Is that when you're sharing your screen, ma'am, you will have to click on the optimize screen sharing for video clip, because the videos sharing are breaking. They are not playing in a flow.
Okay, now I'll just try it again now. Okay.
Yes.
Now just tell me what it is. Now I am going to share a screen. So optimize screen sharing for video clip. Yeah, I got it.
Yes.
I got it.
And then you can share your screen.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yes, and you can stop it immediately so that the same setting will be taken on the next time you share your screen.
Only one problem, that your screen has become fuzzy now.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, that will happen. That will happen. That's.
Ma'am, you could try. We are at
again. I'll try again. I try and stop sharing, and then I try normal way. I'll try normal way.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm removing that optimized sharing, and I'm trying again and just see how the video works. Is that okay? Are you seeing my slide? Dr. Vinian, can you see?
Yeah, it's better now. Otherwise, it will be very. It's a little breaking, but it's okay, because you are anyway trying to show the treatments, so that's okay. So otherwise, it is very, very blurred. So the fonts are very blurred.
Of the slide, yes.
This
is
is
it okay?
clear. This is
Very
clear.
odd.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
can we open the webinar for everyone to join now?
One
Yeah,
second, I'll stop
Yeah.
here.
So the plan is I will just start and welcome Professor Paul to open the session. And Gagan, you would like to say a few words, no?
Not really. I mean, I think you should just. I'm here to listen to you guys. So
Okay.
I
So
think you.
then I think then
you and
after,
Rajesh would like to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more important.
Okay. So after that, Dr. Rajesh Sudani will introduce
Yeah.
the speakers
Yes.
and then say a few words about the subsection.
Speakers only the first two, right? Or you want me to, because everything else will be too many things, too many speakers. You want to speak after we finish the first couple of lectures, I mean the first lecture, the Humanism, the keynote address, then you can
No,
introduce...
each time we can introduce the other speakers.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's
good
okay.
idea. So first one, Dr. David Coulter, right?
Yeah, David. No, they are together.
They're together. Okay.
They are together.
Yeah,
So,
but I'm gonna present first, I think. David, is that correct?
Yeah, Dr.
Yeah.
Tar is first and then me.
okay,
Yeah.
so you can introduce both of them.
Yeah.
I start though,
Yes.
so
Yes.
Okay.
make sure you give me the chance to do that.
We are now audible and visible to all the attendees.
Perfect.
Okay. So good evening and welcome to the webinar, IAN webinar on the pediatric neurology subsection, which we will be conducting for the next 2.5 hours. And it will be a pleasure to have all the participants on this show. And also we have people joined in from India and the neighboring countries. So without much further ado, I am the convener of the Pediatric Neurology subsection of the Indian Academy of Neurology, Professor K.P. Vineyan. So I would like to invite our president of Indian Academy of Neurology, Professor Pramod Pal. He is the professor of neurology at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, otherwise called NIMHANS in Bangalore. So over to you, sir, for the introductory remarks and inauguration of this program.
Good evening, and to our international viewers, good afternoon or good morning. Thank you, Dr. Vineyan. And it is really a pleasure for me to inaugurate this subsection webinar. And you know that the webinar is a good byproduct or whatever is the effect of COVID infection, after which the whole international community has come together with different forms of webinars and interactive sessions. And Indian Academy of Neurology has started the subsection webinars for each of the 17 subspecialties what we have. And it is also great to know that the subsection, pediatric neurology subsection, had already conducted the masterclass in pediatric neurology just 2 months back, I think 18th and 19th of August. And they're again up with another webinar. And I congratulate all of you and wish you a great success for this webinar. Over to you, Dr. Vineyan.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us today. And Professor Gagandeep Singh, who is the villain behind the Indian Academy of Neurology at this point in time, the Secretary General of Indian Academy of Neurology, is also with us. Gagan, anything to say?
Oh, I think you guys are doing a great job, and I'm all ears to you and the wonderful speakers and the excellent topics that you have assembled for this webinar. Wish you all the best for this exciting 2 hours of learning, and wish all the best to all the delegates. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gagan. Now I would like to invite our chairperson and chairperson of the subsection and the senior most neurologist in the country, one of the senior neurologists in the country, in Professor Rajesh Sudani from Mumbai. So he will be giving a brief introduction of the subsection and the program today, with and also introduce our keynote speakers from all the way from Boston, Dr. David Coulter and Dr. Elsie Torres from Boston.
Yeah.
Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Vineyan. I think, with Vineyan's efforts, we have really had a very active pediatric subsection of the Indian Academy of Neurology, which we started with Gagandeep's help in 2018. And I think it's going from strength to strength. Today's, topics are actually a mixture of not only what we usually hear about the science and the clinical practice of pediatric neurology, but also a very important subject which has been ignored, I feel, at least in the Indian context. Though it very much exists, there is humanism in child neurology, and many people must be wondering what humanism is, and I will leave it to the two esteemed speakers to actually go through it. I've read Professor Arnold Gold's uh, uh, grand rounds many months ago. And at that time, Professor Gold was a teacher of mine in the sense, when I was training in New York, he was in the Columbia Presbyterian. And I think he realized that humanism in child neurology was going out of the, medical practice. And I think they had a big organization and a fellowship and everything to sort of bring it back. Uh, Professor David Coulter, and coming to these two speakers, Professor David Coulter and my friend Alcy Torres, who I trained with in Miami many years ago, have both consented to be the keynote speakers. David Coulter is an associate professor of neurology from the Harvard Medical School in the Boston Children's Hospital, one of the meccas of neurology, and he has been awarded several 2017 recipient of the National Award for Humanism in Medicine from the US Child Neurology Society, and a recent award 2019 of the National Humanitarian Award from the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Alcy Torres has received his MD degree from Ecuador, and then after that moved to the States, finished his residency in Miami, and then went on to Harvard Medical School, did his pediatric neurology fellowship, and finally was on the staff there for many years. And now he is the director of the pediatric brain injury program at the Boston Medical Center. He had attended the ICNC 2000 as a faculty member, and he had actually come for a lovely talk in that time too. He is also very interested in traumatic brain injury in children. So I welcome both of you. I hope all of us have a very interesting session. And over to you, Dr. I think Dr. Alcy is talking first. Yes.
Thank you, Brajesh. Thank you for your kind introduction. Good, great. Can you see my screen now?
No, you just share it, I think.
Let me see.
Give
me 1 second. I just need to press one. Let me see. Maybe here. What about now? Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Let me see if we can, if it goes through. Just 1 second. Okay, perfect. Great, excellent. So good evening. It is an honor to be here tonight to talk to you about humanism in child neurology. I would like to thank Professor Bineman for inviting us, and Brajesh, my good friend, for moderating this talk. India has been always generous to me, and I'm more than happy to present this work to you. I have no financial disclosures for this talk, but I'm the co-founder of the IGNA-sponsored Namaste project that David is going to talk to you a little bit later. And I'm currently the chairman of the ethics committee of the Ibero-American Academy of Pediatric Neurology. Many long, well-written books have been dedicated to talk about humanism, so I cannot do full justice to explain this view of the world that we're living, this philosophy of life, this approach to values and meanings applied to child neurology in just a few minutes. So I will instead concentrate in the following learning objectives: to define humanism and demonstrate that it is a core construct in everyday practice and education of child neurology, to differentiate between humanism and professionalism, to demonstrate educational techniques to foster and encourage humanism, and to become familiar with some resources like the Gold Foundation and the Namaste project that will be available to you in the near future. There is no one single definition of humanism, but if I must choose one, this will be: Humanism, it is characterized by a respectful and compassionate relationship between physicians, as well as other members of the medical team and their patients. It reflects attitudes and behaviors that are sensitive to the values and the culture and ethnic backgrounds of others. To understand the philosophical basis behind the humanistic thinking, I want to quote Andrew Cobson, one of the most prominent representatives of the humanistic movement in the United Kingdom, and take on three concepts to give you some of the typical attitudes that are associated with the humanistic worldview. Something about reality, something about morality, and yes, something about meaning. Let's start with something about reality. And it is pretty fair to say that broadly speaking, across the whole history of human thought, as long as men and women have looked around and asked themselves, what is this sort of place that we're inhabiting? What's going on in here? What is this stuff all around us? What is made of? How does it work? There have been going on two sorts of answers to these questions. There have been people in almost every time and every place who have looked around them and said, this is not all there is. This crude material reality that we perceive is just the screen in front of a greater reality beyond it that we can approach and touch through a spiritual means. And then there is being another way of looking at the universe. People who have said, this what we see and what we perceive with our senses, this is reality. We can understand reality by our observation, by our intellect, and there are different ideas that come out of this concept. The second element, it is morality. Again, there has been the idea that this comes from inside the human experience. And on this view, you can see very quickly, morality is a sort of sympathy with other human beings. It's generated by our interactions. It is about being yourself and seeing yourself in the face of the other person and respecting them for the same reasons you respect yourself. Reason, empathy, and thinking about are the best way to live, are the consequence of this view of morality. The third element that I would like to talk to you about on the Venn diagram is meaning. There is a view of the meaning of life that has it that the purpose is out there waiting to be discovered. That you search around the universe, you study hard the trajectory of reality, the patterns that you find around, and in that you can discern meaning, purpose, intention. Reality is going somewhere. And in your search, and if you do it hard, you might eventually, Indiana Jones-like, discover the end of your quest in a log chest deep in a cave. The meaning that you have been searching for, and it was there for all the time, if only you knew it. That is, however, not the view of the humanistic attitude. The view of the humanistic attitude is that meaning is not something out there waiting to be discovered, but something that we create meaning in a sense of purpose in our own lives, that we are the ones who ascribe meaning to the experiences that we have. The people of faith attributes to a creator. These ideas, found in combination, can be discerned pretty much everywhere, that there have been communities writing down their thoughts. You can find it over 2.5 thousand years in India, 2.5 thousand years in China, and over 2.5 thousand years in Europe. And of course, they are all over the world today. And today, we call this approach to life humanism. We are all familiar with the Hippocratic Oath. Many medical schools still require graduating medical schools to take the oath. Hippocrates already established some basis to practice in medicine when he said, it's the physician's duty to benefit the sick and keep them from harm and injustice. William Osler, a Canadian doctor who was one of the co-founders of the Johns Hopkins Hospital and one of the most quoted physicians of all time, said, "It is much more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has." The pediatric board has 6 professionalism sub-competencies and milestones. 5 of them are related to humanism, just to show you the importance that this is taking over time, and only 1 related to science. Medical schools in the United States have a government center that has established clearly that medical schools must ensure that the learning environment for medical students promotes the development of humanistic values. So we see ourselves instead quite properly as being on one far edge of the spectrum of those sorts of humanistic-like behaviors. But the conscious attribution of meaning to experience and the spending time in trying to explore the question of why are we here, where are we going, what are we doing, how we should live, it is indeed a very human endeavor. Humanists have intended to talk about how should we live well in one life that we have. And that sort of talk is guided obviously by humanistic convictions. Acceptance of the finite nature of the human person in time has consequences for the question how we live and what meaning we might want to give to our lives. Spiritual thinkers see this more as a path to something bigger. But regardless of what you think, what your motivation are, these behaviors are still quite similar when it comes to how we treat our patients with neurodevelopmental disabilities. This life is not just an episode of our existence. And so the development of a whole person and the search for the answer to the question how best to live has added a sense of urgency. And in consequence, it tends to shift our thinking away from the meaning of life to talk instead about the good life. What is the good life? How should we live in this life? Not looking for purpose in the outside, but within our own experience that we have. Now, a phrase like living a good life immediately meets objections. People will tend to say, it's good to talk about the good life, but you know, Alcy, for most people, this sort of thing isn't available. Human life is not just good. It's not just the case of the pursuit of nice ways and beings, interest in personal development and fulfillment. Actually, there is a huge amount of human life that is full of tragedy. There are people today who have painful lives, and that is how they were born, and unfortunately, how they will die. And the most graphic embodiment of that today is probably, I think, something that we all accept now, the concept of global inequality that we live. So, acknowledgement in a sense of our universal human tragedy for humanists does provide the functional basis for compassion. And the humanist answer to the question of whether we can speak of human experience in a universal way faced with this inequality is something that, according to Richard Normans, a humanist, we not only we can, but we must. If then we are talking about the good life, the way to live now, how should I live before? In a sense, again and again, in the last of 1,000 years, the idea that has persisted and risen repeatedly in that the aim of life should be the pursuit of happiness. This is the overarching aim in an individual human being's existence. Equally, however, to the point Epicurus is making, pleasure comes from creativity, from the relation, eternal endeavor and a plethora of other sources. So the pursuit of happiness is not just the pursuit of pure sensation, it's also the pursuit of personal development. Now, sometimes we physicians encounter several walls that challenge our humanistic character. The stress, fatigue, chaos of modern medical organizations are hurdles we need to face. Physicians might respond with irritability by being short, And patients become the problem instead of the reason. Why are we here leading to lack of self-care, empathy, burnout, early suicide in physicians, or early retirement? Now, how big it is the problem? How often disruptive behaviors occur among us? In any study, up to 95% of physicians described have witnessed a disruptive behavior, and that is pretty much all of us here. So it seems like we have a lot of work to do. Respondents were aware of potential adverse events that may have occurred because of disruptive behavior in up to 60%. Nurses, physicians, and administrators witness unprofessional physical behavior on a regular basis, so much that they are trained to deal with this type of behaviors. Providers who knew a nurse who left the organization because of physicians' bad behavior was 30%. But is there a recompense? Is there something to earn, if you wish, for being humanistic? Numerous studies support the notion that humanistic behavior will have direct impact on patient care, will provide better patient outcomes, will improve adherence to therapy, and increase patient and physician satisfaction. The humanistic child neurology qualities should be either the mnemonic of the Gold Foundation IE Cares or the 5 T's that have been published in the Journal of Clinical Ethics. I for integrity, E for excellence, C for compassion, A for altruism, R for respect, E empathy, S service, or the popular time talk touch trust. So now I'm going to present to you some reflections of several physicians who have been distinguished among us because of their humanistic traits, including David. Patient-centered is considered a very humanistic approach. To accomplish that, you might need to twist the golden rule. Treat others how patients wish to be treated. Our patients are not a number or collection of symptoms and signs. Find common ground despite the obstacles. Become an advocate, a problem solver. Show empathy. Acknowledge their emotions. Find humanity beyond science. Sometimes going this little extra step goes the distance. Now, remember, humans need to connect. We matter to each other. So nurture the relationships, respect them. This is something very hard to teach. It's better to model. Be mindful, be aware. Appropriate touch, eye contact, avoid looking at the paper, at those notes, or computers, cell phones, very important. Always smile. A pediatric neurologist has to smile, has to play with toys. If you find an adolescent, ask, what are you interested in? Looking at the whole person, not at the disease process. Please do not label patients with names of disorders like the Sicklers, for example. Reach out to the human being in front of you with dignity and value the moment, even if it is a bad situation, like within a funeral. Value those moments, those few minutes that you share will enrich our interaction. Do it one at a time. When you are so satisfied with one person, this might continue to happen to you. Sometimes we're not aware of the job that we're doing until a patient tells us goodbye. And then there is a number of emotions that are produced that you don't prepare. You cannot prepare. The big hug, the cry, the look in the eyes of the patient that tells you that you probably did something right. Even when the outcome is not the best, it is good to share the moment because patients value that and it's very meaningful to them. Remember, this is a process. Be realistic because this is a measure between our best intentions and our constraints. Remember always why you came to medicine. And if you are able to care for the patients, the job doesn't stop there until you change reality for them. So try to Build a therapeutic bond, not based on a schedule, but based on patient needs. Be patient, patient with your colleagues, patient with your family. If something goes wrong, try to think about it. It is a bad person or it is a bad situation. What I will do if I will be in that situation? Dedication is important. Sometimes, how do you respond to a page when you're in after hours, you're doing shopping, you're with the family? That reaction sometimes defines what will be your humanistic traits for life. What is altruism for you might not be for somebody else. Remember, humanism is about love, kindness, humility, and a genuine curiosity to learn. How to measure privilege? It is difficult to measure, but remember, it is a privilege to being able to be part of children and their family lives. But to do that, you need to be at your best. You're not good to anyone if you're not good to you, if you're not good to yourself or your family. Time, look for time for yourself, time to balance. Appreciate yourself as the human being you are. You cannot go home feeling the way that every patient feels. So use the time effectively and think, what is this person feeling and how can I help this person now, this child? Now, the evolution of humanistic models have changed from patient family center to a more collaborative model in which the patient has the ability to intervene, to participate in this. It is a balance between time, trust, autonomy that creates a modern care plan. Now, it is ironic, but really, there is not much that I can teach you because India has enormous sources of humanism throughout history. I did bring Dr. Gold because he really make a change on this in our profession, in our career. He make us look at this, and not only in child neurology, but in medicine in the United States when he was at Columbia University. And I learned now that he was with Brecht, but he also create this foundation, which one of the things is to educate people from around the world. Now you guys have tremendous inspiration on Gandhi, or even though she was not from India, but dedicate her life to work with Indian people, Mother Teresa. And I just would like to say this is really a very good summary of what, if you are at the level that you can tell the worst news in the most loving way, you are already in a different level. Now, one of the important things is that humanists think it is with optimism. You are what you make yourselves. Aim high, aim for the stars, and you may yet clear the rooftops. You will need courage, tenacity, motivation, and a good sense of humor on the road. Quality of character, happiness, fulfillment of potential and of human needs can be improved through change values, through the redirection of individual by a process of personal change and personal evolution. There is no journey ever successful if you begin expecting the worst. And in fact, you make success much more likely if you set out with a certain determination. I cannot really see what's wrong with the optimism in that sense. So please, do not take hope away from the families. Do not make wild predictions. Instead, let me show you the faces of patients that we see that reflect that behind every face, there is a heart and a soul. There are many stories, unique stories, that I'm sure will make you feel as the great human being you are in the broad sense of the word. In conclusion, humanistic values are intrinsic to the practice of medicine, including child neurology. They require motivation, talents, virtues, and respect for children and their families. A genuine effort to establish meaningful interaction that goes beyond patient care. Physicians should educate, practice, and advocate for humanism in child neurology across the world. And finally, thank you very much for your attention to my presentation. A very strong hug from Boston, where I will hope to see you next year and hug you in person. And now pass the baton to David Coulter, that I'm sure is dying to talk to you too.
Thank you, Elsie. That was lovely. Just stop sharing.
Thank you, Prayesh.
Yeah. Professor Coulter, you need to
Yes.
share your screen. Yeah.
Yes. I think I am sharing the screen now, correct?
Okay.
Yes, yes, you are.
Good. Well, greetings. It is an honor to be asked to talk to you. It would have been better if we could all do this in person, but times change and we have to adapt and change with them. Certainly my best regards to all of you. In the introduction, it was pointed out that I received the award for humanism in medicine from the Child Neurology Society. The award was actually sponsored by the Arnold P. Gold Foundation, which has been such a inspiration to so many of us, as Elsie was talking about. To some extent, I've been trying to live up to that award and be able to talk about humanism and share what I've learned in 40 years of clinical practice about humanism. So that's my goal today. I wanted to speak mostly from a practical perspective of how have I tried to incorporate humanism into my own practice, and are there things that I have learned over the course of those years that might be helpful and useful to all of you and to everybody else. Elsie and I just finished editing a book on global perspectives on humanism and child neurology, which is going to be published by ICNA. And one of the things we learned from that book is that indeed humanism is a global reality, that no matter where you are in the world, neurologists, child neurologists have been incorporating humanism into their practice. And it's in unique ways. I think everybody in different parts of the world had a little bit of a different approach to it, but it is truly a universal aspect of child neurology. Okay. Why is my slide not advancing?
Oh, you just have to click once on the screen, then move forward.
Why is my slide not advanced? There it is. Okay. So in this talk, I'm going to argue for a thesis that humanism means what I'm going to say here, that we are indeed most human when we see the humanity of others. This is something that I read somewhere, I forgot where. But then I thought more about that and realized that first, we need to recognize our own humanity. And therefore, the corollary is that we are most human when we are able to share our humanity with others. So how do we do that? Elsie talked about some of the aspects of how we discover our own personal humanism. I borrowed this idea from a number of folks, including a good friend of mine, Bill Gaventa. But I think that we can think about and discover our own humanism, what humanism means to us, by answering for ourselves these 7 questions, starting with, who am I? What does it mean? Who am I as an individual? What is my sense of identity? And very importantly, to whom do I belong? You know, who loves me and who do I love? And, you know, where did I come from? We all are very much part of our own families, our own culture, our own ethnicity that shapes us and helps us become the person that we are. And then, as Elsie said, I think personal humanism also refers to what I value in my life. What's the meaning of my life? Why am I here? What am I accomplishing? And what is the purpose of my life? Where am I going? What are my goals? What do I want to accomplish? Where am I going in my life? You know, what have I done? What do I want? But most importantly, where am I now and who do I want to become in the future? Those are 7 questions that I think every one of us, no matter where we are in the world, can answer for ourselves. The questions are not specific to any particular culture or ethnicity. I think they are truly universal and human. in thinking about these issues, I also want to discuss, sort of present a case, and I will come back to it at the end of my talk. But just to give you an example, an idea of how we might do this. So I interacted recently with a young patient, I'll call him CF, 19-year-old young man with spastic and dystonic cerebral palsy due to a birth injury. He has normal intelligence. He communicates through assistive technology. He is seated in a wheelchair and moves with help. Using his assistive technology, he has communicated very clearly that his goal in his adult life is to be as independent as possible. But his parents do not agree, and they try to restrict that. He uses whatever resources he can to assert his autonomy, but his parents often override it. So the question is, how can we as child neurologists recognize and support his humanity while also recognizing his need for a connection with his family and community? The physician and writer, Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, described 3 ways that doctors can interact with their patients: fixing, helping, and serving. And I think this is important, and I really recommend it to you to think about this. Because I think as child neurologists, we can do all 3. We fix certainly by when we prescribe medication. Surgeons fix in a different way, but we can also fix. We can also help. Social workers help, but also we do too when we help students and patients with their overall lives, like getting the right educational assistance in school and things like that. But most importantly, we serve. And Remen considered serving to be the most powerful interaction that we can have with patients. And that's really what I'm talking about here. Serving is sharing humanity. And as I say, I think we can do it all, but the particular mix of how we do that, the particular mix of fixing, helping, and serving varies with each patient and each clinical encounter. So I started seeing child neurology patients in 1978. After 20 some years, I realized that I was doing something. I was doing something humanistic. I wasn't, it sort of just happened in the course of clinical care. Most of that time I had spent taking care of poor patients in a variety of settings, mostly taking care of children from Mexico, Central America, South America, Cape Verde, Puerto Rico, Haiti, other places, China. So in interacting with all of those patients over all of those years, I developed a concept that I want to share with you today because I think it helps us. I describe it as the 3 ways of looking. The first look is to see the person as an individual human being, not just a patient or a case. And this is important because we're trying to get past the concept of empathy, although empathy is important. Empathy really is more of an objective assessment of the patient and the family. In the first look, we're trying to see the individual as a human being, not objectively, but subjectively, trying to understand who they are as an individual human being. Really trying to understand how they might answer those 7 questions that I started at the beginning, as much as possible, trying to get a sense of who they are through their understanding of those answers. So as I said, it's what I call the first look is similar to empathy, but I think to some extent going beyond that to reach a sense of who the individual is subjectively. And then once we do that, once we can see the other person as a human being with all of the same sort of desires and wishes and background and feelings like my own, once I see that person as a human being, then I can also recognize that they are a human being just like myself, that their humanity is like my humanity. Which, as I said at the beginning, I think the most important thing is not just to recognize our own humanity, but to be able to share that with other people. And the second look really allows us to do that. When we see the other person as a human being just like ourselves, we also want to value for them the same things that we would value for ourselves. If it's important to me to have life, liberty, and happiness, as Elsie described, then I want to protect the same thing for my patients. I want to protect their lives, their freedom, and help them pursue happiness in their lives. The third look is really kind of unique. And it's a way to see in the other person something that is truly universal. And we can describe that in many different ways. You can call it the, I think Namaste really captures the sense that I see in you the presence of the divine, and I recognize and celebrate that. So the third look, in a sense, is trying to see in the other person that sense of the ground of all being and existence, whatever we may call that. In my experience, it's been relatively rare and unpredictable. It doesn't always, not something that we can plan for, but it's something that we can welcome when it happens. One of my experiences was back in the 1990s. I was working for the United States Department of Justice. They had asked me to evaluate an institution for people with intellectual disability and to evaluate the care of the people who were living there. And the place was terrible, to say the least. It was awful. So my job was to meet with a certain number of the people who were living there. So at one point, I went into this large room where there were 50 people lying on the floor doing nothing. And I was stepping over bodies to meet the person that I wanted to meet. So a young man, totally paralyzed, unable to do anything, but lying on the floor, was awake and alert and aware, but otherwise severely disabled. So I simply reached down, held his hand, as Elsie said, the importance of touch, held his hand, talked to him and said, "Hi, how are you? How are you doing?" I talked to him just like I would to any other human being. And he looked in my eyes and I looked in his eyes, and we had the third look. It was the least likely setting to experience that kind of universal humanity. But my point is that it can happen when we least expect it, but we have to be prepared for it. And I think when we have already accomplished the first two looks, then I think we are ready to receive the blessing of the third look. This approach, I think, also allows us to develop, what I've tried to develop is an approach to bioethics that is not specifically related to any particular cultural background. It is not a Western approach, it's not an Eastern approach, it's not even necessarily an Indian approach, but hopefully something that is relevant to people all over the world and is based, I think, on humanism. In this approach, there are basically three precepts or principles that I would present to you and recommend to you. The first principle is simply to respect in others what I would value in myself. This obviously comes from the first two looks that I just described. In Western bioethics, we talk a lot about autonomy and sometimes give it more priority than in other cultures. So respecting in others, respect for persons is really part of the principle of autonomy. But I think in this case, we want to respect them because we are respecting also what we value in ourselves. It's part of that mutual sharing. So that respect for others is based not just on a principle of autonomy, but based on mutuality of sharing our humanism, because of the relationship that I now have between myself and my patient. The second principle is simple but complicated and important. I think most of us do this naturally, but when we're dealing with any sort of ethical challenge, I think we can ask ourselves, let us try to do the most loving thing possible, not just following rules, not just following convention, not just doing our duty, not just trying to save money, but what is the most loving thing possible? And we can think about that because because of the mutuality of sharing and because of the two looks that I talked to you about, we now love in the patient what we would love in ourselves. So therefore, we will try to do for the patient that what we would do for ourselves, and try to do the most loving thing possible and find a solution that is best for everybody, including the family. So therefore, love becomes the basis for action. The third principle is something I think, again, that we all do when we're in difficult clinical situations, and that's to ask for help. We may ask for help from a lot of different ways. We may simply ask our colleagues for opinions, or ask other members of the team, or we may go and pray, as I have often done in the hospital chapel, or just through deep reflection and thinking seriously and carefully about what we are trying to accomplish and with our relationship with the patient. So I think it's also a measure of humility, as Elsie talked about. That is an important part of this, that I don't necessarily know what the best thing to do is, but I can try to discover that in a very humble sort of way. And I would argue to you that these three precepts should indeed be applicable universally as a global basis for bioethics. I think they are relevant in every culture and every country around the world. They also are not morally, what's the word I want? They don't necessarily depend on individual situations. I think they're truly universal as well as specific. Let me go back to the case I presented at the beginning and think about what it might mean for us to try to work with my young patient CF. And try to approach our care for him from a humanistic perspective. So first, we should try to see him as an individual human being, not just objectively as a young man with cerebral palsy, but rather subjectively as a young man with his own personal goals and aspirations. As I said, he very much wants to be as independent as possible as a young adult. As much as possible, we should try to understand how he might answer those 7 questions. And that's not easy because he's nonverbal. But if we listen, he'll tell us. If we listen carefully with all of our senses. Second, I think we should hold his hand, look him in the eye, and say as sincerely as possible, I hear you. I want to do for you what I would do for myself if I was in your situation. We want to meet him at that shared humanity. Third, we should try to mediate as clinicians between CF, my patient, and his family, so that we can all share our own humanism with each other. Mine, my patients, and the parents and their family. And when we do that, we can try, as I argued, to do the most loving thing possible by trying to appreciate that he does indeed love his family. They love him. They want the best for him. He wants the best for himself, as well as to continue to be part of the family. And they very much want to continue to be part of, they want to sort of continue to work with us as their clinical care team. So when we appreciate all of that and try to focus on the love that we all share for each other, then we can try to do the most loving thing possible. So fourth, I think we can work with, in this particular case, we can work together with everyone involved. And he's a complicated kid, so he has a lot of other members of his care team, his primary care doctor, his pastor, his gastroenterologist, his assistive technology specialist, his adult transition planner, us as child neurologists, all of us are part of that team. So we work together, again, with a sense of humility and sharing to make sure we're all working together to respect his humanism and to support his goals and his dreams for the future. So I think now is the time. I think as the Gold Foundation and Elsie have told you, practicing humanism really is an important part of, it always has been, but it's especially important part of clinical practice today. I think it has a lot of benefits for our patients, but also a lot of benefits for ourselves. So now is the time to practice humanism in child neurology, time to study humanism in child neurology and learn about global perspectives on humanism in child neurology, for example, as we're doing today, but also through the book that Elsie and I are going to be publishing with ICNA very soon, which I think if you have a chance to read it, you'll find it to be very instructive. Now is the time to teach humanism in child neurology. As Elsie said, we do that best by serving as role models, demonstrating to our students and fellows that it's good to be humanistic. It's not unscientific. It's an important part of medicine. It's also time for us to promote humanism in child neurology, to stand up for it and say, this is important. When I got the Gold Award, I was speaking to the audience of child neurologists. There were 300 or 400 of them in the room. And, you know, you may have seen at the beginning, I've written some poems. So I read a poem at the annual meeting of the Child Neurology Society in 2017, probably the only time anyone has ever read a poem in a scientific meeting there. And the audience loved it, especially the young people, the young residents and young faculty, young child neurologists, really were welcoming that. It's a validation of the importance of humanism. So I think in the end, our job is to help create a more humanistic world for children and families. And I am happy to be here and happy to help in that effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Coulter. Vinayan, are you going to be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can
actually, I had a question, not a question, but an observation. I think what you said is so true. You know, I'm not sure you know this about what's happening over the last few years in India. Is there's increasing physical violence against doctors, and obviously all of us are very upset about it, and there's a lot of in the sense the hostility between patients and doctors seems to be increasing over time. And I think that one of the reasons might be this erosion of this bedside manner, which used to be there, you know, initially, and how we used to deal with patients. And I think there's pressures and so much specialization and not enough time to give to our patients. I think that's the problem.
You know, one of the key aspects of burnout is depersonalization, when we are no longer able to see our patients as human beings. Right. And if you focus on humanism, you can't depersonalize. But I think in the same way, you know, when the patients see us as human beings, they are not going to depersonalize us either. And then we will have a relationship, and that relationship will help us support each other.
All right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. See, my question is here. This human relationship, I'm Dr. Vinayan. So the relationship is actually mutual. No? So it depends on both ends. It's not only the doctor's end. So if we do it, there is a good chance that we will be having a reciprocation. But there is a kind of, so in a violent world, so how we are, again, the question is back to that. So how you feel like in a bad world, like what you have shown, Elsie has shown, in a situation where the patient doesn't have the deficiencies in the system, and then the doctor becomes responsible for everything. So what do you think about that kind of a system? So
first of all, you know, I think not every patient wants to share. I mean, not every person wants to share. And I certainly have plenty of patients that see me as a doctor, and they only want to see me as a doctor. I'm the guy who writes the prescriptions. They don't want to have a relationship, and that's fine. We have to respect that too. And then there are those who do. There are those that, you know, every time we get together, we talk a lot about our lives and what we're doing. And But in the end, doctor-patient relationship is inherently unequal. There's definitely a power inequality. I have power and they don't. So we have to try to bridge that too, and try to restore some of the power that the patient has by giving up some of the power that we have. So I think it takes a little bit of effort on our part to try to equalize and normalize that relationship.
Professor, can you allow me just
yeah, sure, please.
So first of all, we do not pretend to lecture anybody on anything, because we all went to medical school to help people, and for some reason we just dedicate a lot of our time to study, and then it's not that we have time to reflect this in every day, but when you look back, and there are moments that I really would like to give you an example of what we are talking about. When I was in Ecuador, I graduated from medical school, and the first year I was sent to be responsible for a population of 5,000 people, all ages, and I was by myself, very little resources. And yes, at the end of the year, I survived. Yeah, I did a lot of mistakes, fortunately nothing dramatic, but I noticed that there were several reflections. If I was not there, nobody else was going to be there. And also that people value, even on those scarce resources of talent, of knowledge, people value your presence. And when I was leaving, I was able to feel that from the population. And I think that's what we're trying to share tonight with you. It doesn't have to be only when there is a lot of education and technology. We live in a society like that, and yet we don't think that this is being practiced in every day with every patient, even by the same physicians who might be lecturing on this across the world. So I think you have and I think that's what I was saying, this is a terrific opportunity to apply humanism in areas of need.
Yes.
Okay, so I think there is, yeah, so now there is a question here. So the question is, how do we bridge the inequality in treatment of rare diseases? So there is a humanistic issue where we discussed that. Okay, so what do you think about that?
Want to do, David, or you want me to?
No,
yeah, both of you.
I think that's a very important question, especially in a global perspective. The inequality of resources around the world, and why it's unfair. Actually, wrote a poem about this. But life is unfair. That perfectly brilliant and wonderful young people living in places around the world where nobody recognizes that, and they don't have a chance to become the person that they could be. And yet there are places like the United States and Europe where people get all the resources, that even more than they might deserve. So this is a huge problem, and I think all we can do is do the best we can, quite honestly.
So this is a terrific question. This is something that has been breaking my heart since they invented the treatment for muscular dystrophy. And it is breaking my heart because I go different places, make the diagnosis, and I see, and even within the United States, that there are people that don't have access to those treatments. And so there was one slide in which I was saying, now that we have the knowledge and we can diagnose the patient, it shouldn't stop there. Now we need to change reality. And the way we do it is we express. And because you guys are all in good positions to express and be heard, I think that's what we do. So I have been talking to the companies on this. And our colleagues from colleagues did an article published about the ethics of the muscular dystrophy treatments. And why is that we are placed in a position of deciding who lives, who dies. Since I was a neonatologist at some point of my life with so many thorns, I remember this was a question that came constantly. Who do I resuscitate versus who I shouldn't, right? And this is not a good place to be. But again, it is, we should not be quiet. When there is something like this, the people that don't have voice depend on us, and we should not be fearful. So even in here, I express myself. I know that sometimes you can get hurt, but you see, I was a bit revolutionary when I was in medical school, and life didn't treat me too bad.
Okay, so I think there are no more questions here. So, sir, you can wind up the session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Alcy and Dr. David. I think it was a, it was a sort of opening many people's eyes to what we know all this, but we need to use it all the time in our practice. And I think if we keep those few things, when you see a disabled child or a mother who's traumatized by bad news, or we just need to have that sort of feeling. What would happen if it was our child, or that kind of thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you and to everybody on the panel. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, both of you, for enlightening us on this very important topic. And as a personal level, I'll say that after that Namaste project, I was more introspective when I'm talking to people. And what I have learned is even an helplessness can be shared. Yes. So when we are not we are helpless, but when we say that to people, so something I felt like what Dr. Udani was discussing, the violence is sometimes people are feeling like we represent the system, and then for the inadequacies in the system, we are responsible. But when we try to say that we are also part of that, or we are also kind of victims of that system, and we try to express that as doctors, probably the violence will be less. The communication channels will be more open.
I think communication is a key.
Yeah. So with that, I think we will go to the next session. We have a very contemporary topic for the next, that is the COVID in child neurology, and we are all in, and we are not able to hold a face-to-face meeting because of the COVID. So what is the implications of COVID-19 for child neurology practice? Dr. Rachna Dubey Gupta will be talking on that. She is a consultant at Medanta Hospital, Indore in Madhya Pradesh. She had her MD from Mumbai and then had a DM from AIIMS Delhi, and very active child neurologist in that area. So over to Rachna.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I really thank IN Chapter Pediatric Neurology for allowing me to be here amongst the very renowned panelists, and a very eye-opening presentations, as Dr. Udani said. And I guess those are the things we should remember every day when we are going out to work. And I wish I am more and more humble every day when I meet my patients. So really a twist from something which is philosophical and a lifetime learning to something which is our day-to-day and very contemporary and recently what we are facing. So I have tweaked the title more for my convenience, because we know these could be associations or these could be causative. We are yet not very sure. And yes, still possible. So let's see what literature have it for us and what are we seeing in day-to-day in our practice in OPD and indoor practice. Yeah. So this is just the outline to discuss. Coming to the introductory slide, which is like, how did it begin? And if someone has to tell us really, how a pandemic looks like when we see it on world map, this is what we are seeing. This is WHO's today's page, and we can see the total number of cases crossing 30 million, and India 5 million plus, 17.8% of share. And we are only next to USA and soon going to cross, something where we don't want to race and don't want to become number one really. Deaths, we can say it's really half of, what the cases we share, so 9.1%, the reasons should be looked for. Like, is it really true, or is it the reporting, or missing out cases, or overlap of definitions, or diagnostics, whatever. So 9.1%, which is still a good number, 87,000, soon reaching 0.1 million, and where the world reaches almost 1 million. And something, which I'm really scared about is we have not yet reached the peak. We are still at uphill. So let's see where we go from here. So this is the current scene in terms of total number. Now coming to the neurotropism of SARS-CoV-2, we all are aware that it has a lot to do with ACE2 receptors and also expression in the various cells. And it is very, very ubiquitous, and almost all cells have it. When it comes to the brain, there is some heterogeneity in terms of expression. And whichever cell is kind of double positive for ACE2 and TMP RSS2, it's kind of, we can say, a passport for the entry of the coronavirus into the cell. So basically, if we want to say that COVID-19 is directly neuropathogenic, we have to prove that it is entering the cells and it's causing a direct insult. And otherwise, whatever we are seeing is possibly a cytokine storm and secondarily caused CNS and PNS system. So this seems a very interesting paper where people have tried to see that what is the ACE2 expression within the CNS and spinal cord. And we can see here, pons, medulla oblongata, and amygdala are really on the upside. And to match with this, we have some, microvascular radiological studies to suggest that there are patients where they have done a follow-up study and they have found changes in hippocampus, cingulate gyrus, and perisylvian and opercular areas. And these are the ones where possibly we have more ACE2 expression. So something, we have a substrate to have something neuropathogenicity from COVID-2. Now coming to what could be the entry points and how does virus reaches the CNS. So yes, first and foremost, what we are talking more about is anosmia, directly the olfactory nerve 1 getting involved, reaching the olfactory bulb. But also, yes, we have a lot of that goes with 5 as well. And also because we say even the cornea is the point of entry. Cranial nerve 9 and 10 also possible because we say loss of taste. And 10 again, because we are talking about GI involvement, we are talking about pulmonary baroreceptors, and from there it can be a retrograde entry to the CNS. So this is where we say direct infection and related injury. And of course, related to blood circulation, lymphatics, immune mediated, hypoxic, other mechanisms, and also inflammatory cytokine mechanism. Now, this is something which is really worrying for our community. We can see here, this is one of the very recent paper, which is kind of reviewing what we are seeing as neurological morbidity in COVID-19 pandemic. And this is discussing the papers related to that. And we can see our share is like 1%. So we are almost number 2 in the total number. And I'm sure not that we are not seeing. We just heard Dr. Gagandeep Singh on it just before the talks, the program started. And we know that we do have many numbers, but yes, we have less representation when it comes to literature. So obviously we'll be missing out something if we are seeing differently than the rest of the world. Now this is one of, one of the pediatric kind of systematic reviews we can see where the local Indian group has tried to see how many publications, how many papers, total number of cases, and how many have reported non-specific and specific neurological manifestations. So we can see here, 21 papers were found fitting to what they were trying to see. Total cases were 3707, and almost 16.7% had non-specific and specific neurological manifestations. So that means close to 15-16% do have something or the other neurological, even in the pediatric cohort. 15.6% were non-specific, and which included fatigue, headache, myalgia. That means obviously these were not coming to the neurology team. And only 1% had specific neurological presentations in the form of seizures, encephalopathy, meningeal signs, cranial nerve signs, vision changes, and GBS. Now we can see here that many things are still missing, which are reported in adult population, like myositis, rhabdomyolysis, stroke, NMJ involvement, and many things. Stroke is something which is being largely talked about in adult and from NYC group and others, and we don't see it coming up majorly here, representing in the pediatric cohort. So maybe we have to just wait and watch for it, because children are different, but of course we do have a substrate for hypercoagulable states, and they are also having hypercoagulable states. So maybe in time to come, we might see that, and we have to just keep our eyes open to those. This is one of the Neurology India review article, and we can see here, it kind of lists what all we can see in COVID-19, and a long list. CNS and PNS involvement, common and uncommon. And of course, whosoever is handling right now the acute neurology cases will know that we are coming across all this in different ways. In encephalitis, encephalopathy, also, NEC, acute hemorrhagic necrotizing encephalopathy, ADEM, brainstem encephalitis, PRESS, and venous sinus thrombosis as a part of stroke deal. So all these are things which are obviously seen more by the adult team, but also the encephalopathy, seizures, and meningitis part is also a common presentation for pediatric team. Coming to the peripheral nervous system, GBS is still, I guess, something which all of us are seeing, but how much of it is directly contributory, or we are just seeing as part of post-fall GBS, as we often see. Those are the things which still need to be answered, and we have to have clear definitions for COVID, post-COVID, or associated with it, or directly pathogenic related to COVID. Now, headache is something which has been reported by many large series to as good as in 70% cases, when the fever was only 40%. So headache and myalgia, body ache has been part of the younger COVID-19 patient cohort, and it is something which has to be kept in mind always. Coming to the encephalitis and encephalopathy repertoire, what COVID-19 is throwing at us. So encephalitis per se, where we say directly invasive, and we have to have CSF COVID PCR positivity, is really rare. Very rare case reports in adults. Encephalopathy is much more common. Fever and seizures, something like acute encephalitis syndrome, is much more common in pediatric as well as in adult. Very peculiar encephalopathy with psychiatric disturbance, delirium, has been reported in children as well as in adult. CSF virus detection is more so in encephalitis. I mean, it has to be reported in encephalitis by definition, but in general, encephalopathy patients are negative in CSF. Something very peculiar for imaging, I should say, as we saw in that histogram, which was showing us that limbic system is particularly vulnerable because possibly the olfactory bulb are possible site of entry. So those are the areas which should be seen properly, and the FLAIR has been really useful, and especially FLAIR contrast. So in fact, FLAIR contrast enhancement is something which is peculiarly noted by the radiology groups, and it has been reported. Also, something which is very important is not to forget, really, most of us have protocol to do a CT chest for our indoor admissions and patients, and this is where most of us are picking up our COVID-related cases. Now coming to the encephalopathy related variants, where we can have ADEM, we can have NEC, and also as posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome, frontotemporal hypoperfusion, which can just come up as delirium. Something which is, again, we should be keeping in mind looking at that histogram, that brainstem and pons involvement is very peculiar, and at times could be adding to the respiratory rhythm-related issues which we are seeing in these patients, and could be really, could be really different to whatever they are having in terms of respiratory involvement. So their respiratory rhythm-related issues, which cannot be explained fully by their lung involvement, could be caused by the brainstem direct involvement. So this was almost the first patient which they reported as encephalitis, which was positive. The SARS-CoV RNA was positive in CSF. And we can see CSF is really unremarkable. Protein sugars were next to normal, only 12 cells. And we can see that sinusoidal involvement in ethmoid is there, but still it is negative nasopharyngeal swab, something which is kind of, a lot of discrepancy, which we also notice when we are seeing these cases in day-to-day. So limbic involvement, medial temporal lobe and hippocampus, and the flare again being used to delineate these acute changes in these cases. And NEC also, there have been case reports. And as we can see here, these are two cases which are reported, and the imaging very, very classical for NEC, and also a hemorrhagic component, not to forget the temporal involvement seen in these cases, and also the hemorrhagic component which is seen in thalamus and elsewhere in the cortical regions as well. And something which we have to remind ourselves that whenever we are seeing these thalamic changes, then also have a good look at the veins and arteries, because we can also be seeing thrombotic complications. So NEC versus venous sinus thrombosis, or top of basilar artery syndrome due to thrombi or others. This is classical press. I won't be really discussing that, but yes, if the patients are having BP fluctuations, then we should be looking for it more actively. And also the hemorrhagic component is part of press presentation in COVID-19 cases. Now, this is something which is more pediatric specific, I should say. This was first when it was reported in UK in cluster of patients who had Kawasaki-like illness or multi-system inflammatory syndrome. In children and adults, and now which is associated with COVID-2. So MISC associated with COVID-19. So these are the cases which have been coming up from multi-center study in North America and Americas, and also from Europe. And all these patients are having more of multi-organ failure and shock. So most of the times they are under a critical care or a multi-specialty team, and where neurology involvement can be a really small part of what these patients are facing. So in terms of case definition, this paper in Lancet is really very good, where they have tried to specify each one: Kawasaki disease, Kawasaki syndrome, toxic shock syndrome, and MISC, which is with COVID-19. So whenever we are kind of labeling it, it's good to refer to these definitions for day-to-day purpose as well. This is a very kind of important reminder to ourselves that whenever we are seeing a peak of COVID-19, we could come across this inflammatory syndrome maybe 2 to 3 weeks after that. So maybe if we are peaking now, or we have done this 2 weeks prior to this, then this is the time where we can be seeing our cases in the OPD and also in the indoor cases. So need to keep an eye on those. Again, this is one of the August paper, a systematic review in Journal of Pediatrics. And in patients who have MISC, we can see almost 20% can have neurological involvement, and which could be more in the form of very non-specific encephalopathy, headaches, muscle weakness, brainstem cerebellar signs, as it is there in this JAMA Neurology paper, which came from UK. So though it was a brief report, but it was quite a trigger and eye-opener for everyone else and all the groups to look for these. And after this, more and more reporting and more cases. Something which is to learn from this paper is MRI in all 4 cases which had neurological signs and symptoms had splenial signal changes. So something, where we had a marker, but we all know that it is not really pathognomonic of one or other. And to make it more confusing, it can be seen even in Kawasaki and also related syndrome. So symptoms, all these patients were obviously COVID PCR positive. CSF was kind of unremarkable, most of the times acellular. COVID PCR was negative, so that means it was more qualifying for encephalopathy rather than encephalitis. EEG and other electrophysiology were unremarkable. Something which is good, like, all of them showed neurological improvement, and there was no mortality. So this is again to learn from all 4 cases that all had splenial involvement, and one follow-up patient showed a partial recovery as well. So the case 1 showed a partial recovery on day 12, and rest everyone also, we can see that all of them, even on day 21, had a good splenial involvement. As I said, all of them recovered, and of course they were treated more on the line of Kawasaki and inflammatory system disorder, because those guidelines are led by the society, and they were given methylprednisolone, DEXA, other immunomodulators, and showing good recovery. Coming to, as I was saying in the beginning, cerebrovascular accident, stroke, which could be hemorrhagic, ischemic, or even thrombotic events, haven't been much reported in pediatric literature, though there has been very regular and very independent risk factor, COVID being very independent risk factor for stroke presentation. They have tried to compare it with influenza pandemic and other baseline states. So this is something which is not yet coming up for pediatric literature, but we need to keep a watch on this, especially in the vulnerable groups like sickle cell anemia, nephrotic syndrome cases, and patients who have thrombotic predisposition. GBS, again, GBS and COVID-19 associations have been widely reported in literature. Total of 73 cases in the last systematic review. We know that in terms of peripheral nervous system involvement, anosmia and eleusia are the commonest one, because they are also taken as PNS involvement. Cranial nerve isolated can be seen, and also can be seen in association with GBS. Very peculiarly, even bifacial involvement with GBS has been reported. Cases of Miller-Fisher, Bickerstaff type brainstem encephalitis, and others. Something which we have to remember again is that MRI contrast has been found often useful in GBS associated with COVID-19, and at times cervical and even brainstem contrast enhancement has been reported. Again, to remind ourselves that in these cases, CPK can be elevated because they can have associated muscle involvement. They can also have critical care related neuropathy and myopathy secondary to intensive care. So of course, in the critical cases, we have a lot of other things which we have to keep in mind when we see GBS cases. So 73 cases in the last paper, which I could see. And this is a histogram from that paper. We can see, like from Italy, many cases coming up in July. So whether it is most of a post-COVID-like phenomena, or is it like, their baseline or incidental? From India, we can see only 1 case reported. And obviously, I can say that that has to be a very gross underreporting, and it's that too only in June and nothing after that. Again, myopathy and NMJ has not been reported in pediatrics, but yes, myalgia, elevated CK, we know that we are seeing in our cases. Of course, rhabdomyolysis, which has been occasional case reports, and we have to remember HCQS associated myopathy and even critical care myopathy in patients who have muscle involvement. Now, just briefly summing up with this patients, one of our patients whom we saw. So he is 7-year-old who presented to us with very high grade fever and seizures and delirium, not responding to parents, very abnormal behavior, and all this within 12 to 24 hours. As a protocol, what we have in the hospital, Any indoor patients who's coming up with fever is subjected to HRCT chest and the whole COVID panel, including cytokines, inflammatory markers, and also RT-PCR. So we can see that typical ground glass appearance, and cytokines, inflammatory markers, all were up. He did not have any multi-organ involvement. So he was not really fitting classically into MISC. And COVID PCR was positive in his case, though it is not the norm. There are other cases who were exactly like this and they didn't have COVID PCR positive. So that is one thing which will be troubling us in pediatric cases. And again, to emphasize here, CSF was absolutely normal in this case. In MRI, we didn't see anything in the splenium. But yes, the white matter changes, which were subcortical and deep white matter, were very classical. He did not have any BP fluctuations or multi-organ dysfunction or shock. And within 5 to 6 days, he was fine and he recovered. So most of our patients are presenting in this manner, not come across anything like MISC as of now in our center. So the take home is that COVID-19 is a global threat to the nervous system, as we can see from most of the reportings. Precise case definitions, and they have to be improved in order to distinguish non-specific complications or incidental or just associations. Encephalopathy and seizures are more there for us and more commonly seen. And of course, ADEM and NEC are rare, but we need to watch for them. And stroke, of course, we have to keep an eye for those and keep checking in the vulnerable kids. So something which I have written lastly is the sequelae, which papers and people are already coming up with, and especially related to memory loss and also the permanent radiological deficits. So when it comes to children, of course, we will have developmental and other issues to look forward, like, if they have neurological complications and which is affecting their development and learning later on. So it could be a big burden if we start seeing the acute cases in this manner. Now, this is the last slide, just to say that the support system for most of the chronic neurological disorder, neuromuscular disorder, and developmental disorders is actually completely shattering. And this is something which we need to gear up in terms of telemedicine, outpatient clinic, and ancillary services, especially related to therapies and physiotherapies for patients who have autism and developmental issues. And this is something which individually we have to look into, and also at the institute level as per policy. Thank you for patient listening. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachna. It was a very good review, and it is very early times to decide on what is the impact, real impact. So any questions? Only one question is here. If you have an encephalitis, how will you confirm it's due to COVID?
Yes, as I said, I mean, in terms of encephalitis, the case definition which currently have been used, they have to have COVID PCR positivity in CSF. And also, as I said, the imaging in terms of involvement of olfactory bulb and also the areas which are very specific for ACE2 density receptor will help. So of course, radiology and CSF positivity for COVID RT-PCR. That will confirm encephalitis. That is the stricter definition. That is what is restricting the total number of encephalitis cases in literature. They are not crossing 3-4.
Okay, so there is some more questions coming up. Yeah, so any role for CSF PCR?
Yes, there is. So any patient which we see encephalopathy versus encephalitis, we have to differentiate with RT-PCR. In fact, it was very interesting that that other case did not have nasopharyngeal swab positivity, but it was there in the CSF.
And any reports on antiviral therapy?
Okay, So antiviral therapy, which is more CNS directed. When I say in encephalitis case reports, not really. So they have discussed it more overall as a case, but not a CNS directed antiviral treatment, not really specifically something which is modified for CNS involvement. But of course, they are handful, 2 to 3. So not really something, which we can draw out of it from treatment perspective.
Okay, so I think we may have to close this session, and there are a lot of questions to be answered, and probably you can review it after 2 months. It will be much more than this. We will get much better answers. So with this, we will close this session. Thank you, Rachna. So over to the next session, next talk by Professor Shefali. So Shefali, are you there? Yeah, so
Yes.
Professor Shefali Galati is the head of Pediatric Neurology at All India Institute of Medical Sciences in New Delhi. She is a well-known figure. She doesn't need an introduction for our audience here, but people who are joining from other countries. She has a very keen researcher and a very active interest in almost all the areas of child neurology, and he was one of the pioneers in the treatments of muscular dystrophy and spinal muscular atrophy in India. So she will be sharing her experience with the current status of the literature on the recent advances in the management of spinal muscular atrophy. Over to you, Shefali.
Thank you, Dr. Vinayan. Thank the IN for giving me this opportunity to share our data. So as spinal muscular atrophy, we all know what it is. This is the spinal muscle atrophy timeline. It was first diagnosed by Wernick in 1891. And almost a century later, we had the clinical classification of this disorder. And in 2007, we had standard of care first time told.
Shefali,
SMN gene was identified in 19...
Shefali, can you put it on screen share with the whole full screen?
It's full screen, sir. Sir, it's full screen. So I stop the share and do it again.
No,
I put it on
fine.
full screen.
Now it's full screen. Yeah.
Fine.
Okay. I think there was a lag. So this is the SMA timeline. In 1891, when Wernick first described this condition, it took a century later to have the clinical classification. And in 2007, first time the standard of was actually standardized, and SMN gene was identified in 1995. And after this, we have been seeing that for last couple of years, there has been increasing research interest. And in 2018, we had more than 400 publications on SMA. So this interest has been increasing year by year. And now we have so many, disease, the study of the drug targets which are taking place.
Vinan,
I think she has got disconnected.
Dr. Gulati has got logged out. She's back in.
Your network bandwidth is low.
So she can, you can advise her to
switch the network. Maybe use another Wi-Fi, ma'am, if it is possible.
Or otherwise,
put up the video.
So,
you are muted. You are muted, ma'am.
Yeah, I have another one. I'm just changing. I have another backup. Give me a minute. It'll just take a minute.
Yes. Okay.
Just a minute. have another one? Another meeting? Is it okay?
This is going on for 2.5 hours.
Huh? It's okay?
Yeah. So
yeah, okay, I'll share the screen.
Share
again.
the screen. Share the screen.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I would also suggest, if you are okay with that, you can switch off your video and only talk so that.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm doing that. Nice. Yeah. Sorry about this technical.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. So this a child comes to us floppy. We all know that a floppy child is what we're thinking about as SMA, and they may also have polymany myoclonus, which will be seen in an older child. Basically, so we have to see whether there is peripheral hypotonia in the child or central hypotonia or mixed when we're approaching the floppy child. And whenever a child is having symmetrical weakness, more of proximal and our lower limbs involved more than upper limbs, maybe with fasciculation of the tongue or polymyomyoclonus, these features which are strongly suggestive of SMA. And but if we have certain weakness of extraocular muscles, diaphragm, myocardial involvement, sensory disturbances and arthrogryposis and CK more than 10 times the upper limit of normal, then we have to think about exclusion criteria. And exon 7 deletion is present in 98% of the patients. And when the faint or when it's a later presenting with the floppy child with the motor milestones, and we have to get an MLP or quantitative PCR, and we have to see the SMN copies and SMN2 copies. If SMN there is no copy, it confirms 5Q SMA, and there is a copy or 2 copies, we have to reevaluate the clinical profile, and we have to look for atypical features and do the CK, nerve conductions, EMG, and RNST. If there's a neurogenic pattern, and then we do a SN targeted sequencing. It is very important for us to remember that we have to do SMN targeting sequencing and not on whole exome. Things can be missed. And if we are not getting all this, then obviously we think for alternative diagnosis and do a whole exome. The clinical classification of SMA is besides the 1, 2, 3 we know of. 0 is the prenatal onset one, and they usually succumb in few weeks. And we all know that 1s are those who are not going to be sitters, 2 are going to be sitters, and 3 are going to be walkers. And some of them may regress to later on and may not be able to walk, and 4 are always walkers. But now with the recent guidelines in 2018, we are looking at the children as non-sitters, sitters, and walkers. So that is very important for managing these children. Now, just for proceeding further, we have to see what are the various drug options, treatment options available. So there are 2 Cochranes. This is the Cochrane 2019, in which for SMA type 1, there were 2 trials with 131 patients, 121 in nusinersen group and 10 in riluzole. And they did find that, the nusinersen groups, fewer patients had died and or required full-time ventilation, and achievement of motor milestones were better. And in the nusinersen group, riluzole was inconclusive. In the other Cochrane review in 2020, this was for SMA type 2 and type 3 by the same group, in which there were 10 placebo-controlled RCTs and 717 participants. And in that, nusinersen has been found beneficial for motor function in SMA type 2, but there was no effect found in the motor function SMA type 2 or 3 creating gabapentin, hydroxyurea, phenylbutyrate, valproate, with or without carnitine, somatotropin, and TRH. But they said that the results of 9 trials were not available, which included salbutamol, before they went to analyze this Cochrane. So they are awaited. So if you over the years, there has been a SMA drug pipeline, and newer drugs are being investigated. In SMA, this SMN2 is a backup gene. Normally, it has 1 or 2 copies. SMN2 produces only 10% of the working protein as compared to SMN1. And when you have the lesser number of SMN1 and 2 copies are less, is more severe, and SMN copies are more, it is less severe. So what happens is in a healthy individual, you know, so if the SMN2, there is a C to T is the change is there. And when the exon 7 is deleted, you get a unstable protein. And when the in the normal protein will be coming. In an SMN patient, there will be obviously the exon 7 and you get a protein is unstable. This is something very important because see, we fortunately have a second SMN gene which I mentioned, and then one related by inverted duplication of C2, and SMN2 contains a mutation in the exon 7 that redoes the alternate lysis with exon 7. So in case a potential therapeutic will prevent this splicing event, it can help producing functional. So nusinersen was FDA approved in December 2016 for all types of SMA, and it is a SMN2 directed anti-stimulation. This unit is the important problem is it's intractable. The 4 doses to be given, first 3 at the interval of 14 days, and the 4th dose at 30 other dose. Maintenance dose is 4 months there, and they have some problems and coagulation abnormality. And in this, because this nucleotide, so the exon gets stimulated and we active protein. The most important was their trial in which it was in an infantile onset SMA. There was significant improvement in more milestones, and this led to early termination of the trial due to significant
is very low. I don't know.
I think
we have a problem.
Wait for her to come back.
Can you do one thing? Can she maybe talk on the phone and you can get the presentation and project it from one of the administrator's slides? The hosts, I mean, can we project and she speak? What do you think?
Yes, we could do that, sir.
Ask her to, because this is even her voice is breaking up.
Yes. Okay, I'll try talking to her.
When did I get disconnected? I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Would you?
Can I? Yeah.
Shefali.
Sorry.
Shefali, is it possible to say go on your phone and you can talk and we can project the slides and then you can talk on your phone or something with a better, because over here you're breaking up, so we can't hear you half the time. We can go to the third talk and then come back to you or something. What do you want to do? Vinan?
Yeah, that is one option because this is one important topic. So what you want to do, Shefali? So you can hear us? Hello?
No, she can't hear us.
Okay. Okay, I think we will. Bhavesh, please talk to her. And hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll just do that.
Yeah.
I am here. I can hear you. I was unmute. I was mute. I can hear you. Is it better? I think this location would be better.
Now it is better. Now it is better.
Yeah, it's better.
Then
I won't stop.
Then you share the screen. Share the screen.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm really sorry. Where had I got disconnected? You can tell me. I'll just start from that. I'm really very, very sorry. I don't know what's happening today.
Yeah, you just share the screen, Shefali.
Yeah, I've shared. Okay. I'm really sorry about it. Is it okay?
Yeah. You are telling about the nusinersen, the second trial.
Okay, I'll just go one.
Okay. So this is okay. So you can go start from here.
Yeah, this is okay. This one. Yeah. I'm really very sorry about it. Yeah. Okay. The first trial was the India trial, which was on infantile onset SMA. And in that, there was significant improvement in the motor milestone, which led to the early termination of the trial. And then they continued these children as an open label trial called the SHINE, which is still enrolling patients. The other one was in late onset SMA, the CHERISH trial, in which also they found significant improvement in the motor milestones. And NURTURE is the one which is ongoing. And NURTURE 1 is the pre-symptomatic stage in they give the first dose. This gives an importance that if you pick them up early, and in this, they found that by February 2020, they found that none of them had any swallowing difficulties, and all of them were having significant motor improvement, and 88% were able to walk. And the Shine is the ongoing, which was the continuation of the NDR, which I mentioned, and they are continuing these children, and they're doing pretty well. Devote is an ongoing trial in which they have studying the escalating intrathecal dosages. The standard dose is 12 milligram. In this, they are doing in 3 parts, and they are using 28 and 50 milligram combinations. And we were lucky to be part of this early access humanitarian access program, which is available to all hospitals pan India, in which the Biogen had started in 2016. We started last year, in which SMA type 1, 2, and 3, all patients are enrolled. But the only problem is anybody who's having a permanent ventilation, or if he's having a Cobb's angle, which is more, it cannot be done because intrathecal administration cannot take place with the Cobb's angle being more. Coming to the gene therapy for the Zolgensma was approved on May 27, 2019 for patients less than 2 years of age with SMA. This is the most expensive drug ever approved by FDA in the world, with $2.125 million for a single dose. Avexis was a company which is owned by Novartis, and but the total cost of treatment with nusinersen, because it's going to last lifelong, will be more than a single dose of Zolgensma. But that is one time, and that is over a period of the entire life. It produces working SMN protein, and there is a delivery of SMN gene into the vector, the Zolgensma, which is there, and there will be a synthesis of SMN protein in the patient, and then is a maintenance of the motor neuron cells. The dose is 1.1 into 10 to the power 14 vector genomes per kg, and it's a single dose intravenous infusion. We have to do a monitoring of, the LFT, platelets, and troponin. And there is a contraindication of having anti-AAV9 antibodies if they are there. It's contraindicated. One of our patients who was, we registered, had very high, so that got registered, rejected. And you have to give before the giving of the infusion, you have to prime with prednisolone, and it has to be given for a month thereafter, which may have to be increased because of, OTPTs being raised and thrombocytopenia. Which we had in our patient will be mentioned. The FDA approval came after 2 open label non-randomized studies. One was the STRIVE, other was the START. In STRIVE clinical studies, it was an open label single arm, single dose gene replacement therapy in the SMA type 1, those with 2 SMN2 copies. And in the 22 patients who were enrolled, 91% of the patients were alive and did not require any permanent breathing support at 14 and 18 months of age. And 59% of them, could be able to, could sit without the help for at least 30 seconds at 18 months of age. START was the other trial, which was for SMA type 1, and in which 100% of the patients who were there who were doing fine in them, and 75% could sit without the help, for 30 seconds. Other studies in progress this time are in Europe, and that's why it's called STRIVE EU. And there's a STRIVE AP for Asia Pacific. And there are another trial, STRONG. In this, they're trying to give an intrathecal infusion of this. Otherwise, it's an intravenous infusion. They're trying to give an intrathecal infusion. It was partially put on hold in October 2019 due to inflammation in some primates they had seen, but then afterwards it has been continued. And there is another phase 3 clinical trial SPRINT, in which they're targeting the pre-symptomatic SMA, those who are aged 6 weeks or younger. And in this, it becomes important to have, a newborn screening. And there's another planned out READ study in which SMA type 1, 2, 3 age, from 6 months to 2 years are going to be enrolled. There is also a long-term follow-up studies of open label phase 4 trial, which is going on from February 2020 to December 2035, which will be for SMA 1, 2, and 3. And they are enrolling by invitation in this trial. In addition, they have a managed access global program to provide this to patients under the age of 2 years with genetically formed SMA. And this they have been doing, and we have to monitor them closely. we have to also understand that, there have been reports in which we have seen there was a 10-12 patients they had done, in which they saw that these children who were treated had reduced pulmonary and nutrition support requirements, improved motor function, and decreased hospitalization rate in the follow-up period. And they have also reported that, the children who had severe SMA type 1, if they are getting it earlier, it becomes an importance of newborn screening for the early treatment. It becomes important. And also there is an indirect comparison, between this relative to nusinersen, and they found that it has found to be beneficial. There's something whether you need to combine these drugs. There's a report of 3 patients who got both nusinersen as well as they got Zolgensma, and they found that if the Zolgensma was given earlier, there was a better response, but the combination of both of them could be causing them to have prolonged OTPT elevation and may require steroids. And this has become very important. And so basically this has been going on between Zolgensma and Spinraza, which will be important and which will be cost effective. But it is seen that because Spinraza is lifelong, so overall cost would be more. Coming to this new oral drug, which is just come up, is Risdiplam. And this has been FDA approved only on 7th August 2020. And this is a SMN2 splicing modifier. And this is the only medication that can be taken orally. And this was approved based on 2 clinical trials, Firefish, which was done, and Sunfish. And the dosing schedule is given orally and supplied as a powder and has mild side effects of fever and diarrhea. And as I mentioned earlier, that when you use a selective SMN2 splicing modifier, you include the exon 7 in the SMN2 mRNA, and then you are able to produce a functional full-length protein. The 2 trials on which it was based was the Firefish, in which it was done on SMA type 1 patients, and they found that 41% of them at 12 months could sit without support, for at least 5 seconds, and 90% did not need any ventilation requirement. And the other trial of Sunfish was, seen for the type 2 or type 3 patients up to the age of 25 years, and they saw significant improvement in motor function, including upper limb motor function. So if you see, the motor function had been improved compared to the placebo. And they have significant, they have no safety concerns are there. Safety data is there and well in place. So the trials in progress are, one is a jewelfish trial, which is done as within 6 months to 60 years of those age people who have received other investigational drugs. So they're giving an option to see. And other is a rainbow fish that is doing the pre-symptomatic one, who are not presenting with symptoms, to try to see how they do when you pick them up early. There is a compassionate program for Risdiplam study. It is globally launched, and it was launched on 14th January 2020. Currently, it is on SMA1 only, and are also some patients are in a process of approval. And they have extending the therapy to more patients whose some Spinraza got interrupted due to COVID-19. But they are currently doing only SMA1. This is a new drug, Pranalipram. This is also a SMN2 splicing modifier like Risdiplam, and there are some ongoing trials which are going on. This is supposed to end by 2020. So this also has a potential benefit. So we see the currently 4 medications which are there, the nusinersen, which is an antisense oligonucleotide, which is also affecting as the SMN2 splice switching. Then you have the gene therapy, yes, and then you have Risdiplam as well as Pranalipram, which are SMN2 splicing switching there. And Risdiplam is given orally daily. The Pranalipram will be given once a week, but obviously its trials are still on. If you compare what is available, Spinraza is intrathecal, Zolgensma is intravenous, although some trials on intrathecal are on, and Risdiplam is oral. And if you see, there are 4 loading doses to be given for Spinraza, 0, 2, 4, 8 weeks, and then maintenance dose every 4 months, lifelong. But Zolgensma is one-time infusion, and Risdiplam is daily, lifelong. The cost of this 15 crores single time for Zolgensma is there. But if you see, Spinraza cost to 4.2 crores per year and 2.1 crores thereafter, calculated for a 20 kg child. And same thing for Risdiplam, the cost will be 2.5 crores per annum. So one we have to remember, before that, I'll just tell you a little bit about our experience. I had done a trial earlier in GABA in 2000, gabapentin and it was placebo-controlled trial, randomized placebo-controlled trial of gabapentin in SMA, and we had not found any statistically significant improvement in the motor functions. And then I had also done a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial of valproate and levocarnitine in children with SMA, and we found that at 52 weeks, it was not found efficacious in improving the muscle strength. We have more than 140 patients registered with us, and we have nusinersen. We are 13 patients were selected for nusinersen, 10 were SMA type 2, and 3 were SMA type 1. One patient of SMA type 1 died before the administration of the dose, although the dose was shipped. 12 have received the loading doses, and all of them, and 11 have received maintenance dose. One was left from because he was coming from Siliguri. He could not come because of COVID, and one of the patient has received 2 maintenance doses. We applied for 4 patients for gene therapy, and 2 patients have been selected. One was given the gene therapy on 29th May 2020. That happened to be, we were lucky to have been the first one that time in the country to have been able to do it. The second one is supposed to be scheduled this month, but yesterday got admitted with chest infection in a hospital outside Delhi. So risdiplam approvals are in process. So how are our children faring? So out of the 12 patients, if we see, it was very important, for all of them, if we see the HMFSC scores, we have seen the scores have increased. These are after the loading doses when they came for the first maintenance dose. Okay, so all the scores for all of them have been improved. And in addition, SMA type 1 patient had no episode of respiratory complaint in the 4 months when during the last 4 months. They were improved activity and reduced irritability. Just giving some representative example, this was an SMA type 2 patient and received the first dose of Spinraza on 2nd of January. And that time the score was 20 and she's creeping on the stairs. And now when she came in July for the maintenance, her score is improved and she can pull herself from sitting to erect position, and then she's also able to maintain. So this has been an improvement in 4 months, but one has to remember that they have to be given, lifelong. This was before, this is after. I just put in so that in case the video doesn't play, so you should get a pictorial example. This is another patient with SMA type 2 who received the first dose on 26 December 2020. This transient sitting with support when made to do so, and when now there's a sitting is without support and raises arms up to the ear level. This was a SMA type 1, and we don't have a video for this patient. This patient has not improved much. Is able to lift the the upper limb with the elbow of the surface and holds on to lightweight objects. And there is a partial rollover from supine to side now, which has now taken place, which she could not do earlier. So there's not much improvement, but yes, but no respiratory infections which have taken place in the child. It's a partial rollover. Coming to the gene therapy, which was done, this child is 17 months, 17 months boy, and we'll have the pre-therapy videos. He cannot cannot hold the head, lifts the upper limbs with the elbows off the surface. So this was pre-therapy. It was on 28th May when this was done, and on 29th May had the infusion. So this was 1 day prior to the infusion. This assessment was being done by CHOP intent. So that is the time we saw. At 6 weeks, he could maintain the head erect transiently, could maintain in sitting position for 3 to 5 minutes. And after he was made to do so, cried loudly, increase in vocabulary was there, started tolerating solid diet well. And then at 12 weeks, can maintain weight on a flexed elbows when turned in prone position, can maintain in a sitting posture for 15 to 30 minutes after he's made to do so, can flex the knees with gravity eliminated, bearing a weight on limbs transiently, and no respiratory infections, and the tongue fasciculations disappeared at 12 weeks. So this was a follow-up video of week 1, in which they can take head from side to midline. And week 2 can roll over from side to prone. He was not able to do anything of that. Week 5, he's starting to grip objects better. And then at week 7 can maintain in sitting position when allowed to do so for 3 to 5 minutes. Then at 11 weeks, maintains the prone position and supported on elbows and flexes the knees with the gravity eliminated. So he is improving. There was initially some vomiting, there was transaminitis, then there was again increased transaminitis that was there, and it's been on steroids. We had to prolong the dose of steroids. Steroids has to be given for a month, but then you can increase it to cover up for the transaminitis. So now he's resolving, and currently now this week was now we're tapering off the steroids. One has to remember, these newer medication therapies are there who are prohibitive in cost. We have to remember that all these children need a multidisciplinary approach to management, and pharmacological part is one part of it. So you need a physiotherapy, occupational therapy, special education, musculoskeletal system has to be seen, growth and nutrition has to be seen, pulmonary, cardiac, and other systemic evaluation has to be seen, and psychological counseling for the family is very important. And this is very important to be kept in mind. And now, since the recent guidelines which came of the management of these children in 2018 in neuromuscular disorders, we have to look at them at non-sitters, sitters, and walkers, as I mentioned, and we have to see for all the systems and provide support care. Neuromuscular disorder, musculoskeletal, orthopedic, nutrition, pulmonary, and you have to give all the referrals have to be done, all the supports has to be done, and the medications become part of it. And then we have to keep in mind this prohibitive cost of the medications. Nobody can afford it. We have just got few patients selected because of humanitarian access program. One is to remember, and palliative care versus the giving the specific treatment, we have to discuss with the family for these, especially the SMA type 1s. And even for sitters, then you have to think about the spine. You have to keep focusing also on the spine. And similarly, nutrition and pulmonary functions we have to see. And same things for walkers. And we have to keep all this in mind and keep telling them what to do in acute care at home and at the time of illness. And we have to talk to them about actually what this causes. It's very important, and try to tell them what the management is there, what are options are available, and what of them are not effective. If they are not effective, because left, right, and center, many of them keep going for stem cells. So we have to understand and explain to them, and we have to give them patient information material in their languages to understand. And in the end, I just want to say, with all the advances in science and technology, everything is going up, but we have to see the child and the family. And don't forget that those drugs are there, but we have to look at the child on a holistic way. And these newer options, which are very a big sign of hope for all the pediatric neurologists and the families of the children having these conditions. But it's a long way before they can be actually be available, actually on the ground, except for these few patients who have been lucky to have been selected for humanitarian access program. Thank you so much for your patient listening, and I'm very sorry for the technical glitches.
Thank you, Shefali. It was one of the most exciting lectures, I think, because this field is evolving, and every one of us will get at least, I hope that at least one patient in the near future who can be treated with gene therapy or Spinraza, because now it has become a humanitarian crisis, because the parents know that the treatment is available and then it is not getting to them, and it is a really, really difficult situation. So say one question here is how long they have promised you to give this new citizen?
That is important. That is a very important question. They have not committed to us as of now. But one thing I'll tell you, because of COVID, it got delayed. They had identified us as the site for the northern India, and they were going to identify SAT Trivandrum as the other site for having SMA patients type 1 coming anytime, and they would be providing anytime, but that they got shelved right now. They'll be looking at it next year. But they had initially promised that it's not written in paper anywhere. For a couple of years that was told, but we're not sure. Even the risdiplam, we have just put in our papers for some of the patients, they have told nothing is written on paper, but they have told couple of years, 2, 3, like that. So we do not know what happens next.
Yeah.
So
we
that's
also
what I'm
have
saying. Ultimately, when the cost will have to be reduced. Yes,
we
sir.
also have a patient of rescue plan. They are not committing it. That's the whole problem. So it'll be very tragic if after 2-3 years the patient improves and then you say bad luck. No, you go.
Yeah,
So,
it's
but the
really,
point
really,
is, cause yeah, it's
yeah,
an ethical issue.
yeah. It's a really difficult to see the parents waiting for this loads, So, and the patient succumbing in between. So we had a few patients, and luckily the last patient we also got selected. So I was planning to come out of this whole program, but maybe this time we were successful. Okay, so we are going to have one patient in this Soletsma group. Okay.
Yeah. Anybody pan India, it's open. All the three access programs are open to anybody in India, in private sector or public sector. But the Spinraza only is giving to the public sector. Reason being, they feel that they have. That's why they were, they're not open to the private sector, because they feel that we have to give intrathecal. So you have to hospitalize the patient. So there were ethics involved about the charges, and also, I mean, that was their logic thing and all. That was the only reason. But any practitioner or anybody anywhere in India can apply for the, gene therapy, because for gene therapy they've identified centers like ours, like Dr. Udani Center, and many couple of more centers pan India, whom they are trained. Now they are training also. So now when you also get, you'll also be trained. So there'll be a couple of centers pan India in the regions where the patients will be sent, and Pune also. They have those centers which they've identified. Initially they were 4, they're expanding. So any person sitting anywhere in the periphery also can apply, and then they can be the referring physician, and they can identify the treating physician in the major hospitals. Like they can go to Hinduja when it's somewhere that's area, come to you when it's down south, like that.
Okay, so it's getting delayed, so we have to move on. The next
and
talk
I really
is,
apologize for the technical
yeah,
glitch.
that is COVID induced, no. So anyway, we are adjusting to the situation. So
yeah.
the next talk is by one of the young energetic child neurologists in the country. Jai, you are there? Yeah. So Jai
Dr.
Shankar
Vinay,
is yeah.
Dr. Vinay, I'll just tell one thing. It's very nice for me to be between two of my students. Rachna was my student, and Kaushik is my student. So in between both of them, it is nice.
Okay, so Kaushik is a very active child neurologist, a young child neurologist who is with a passion for academic child neurology and research methods, and he's working at present as professor of pediatrics at the Pandit B.D. Sharma PG Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences in Rohtak. And over to you, Kaushik. So the topic is very, very important topic on how to foster clinical research. We have a lot of patients, but the output from India or the region is much, much less compared to our patient load and our clinical experience. Looking forward to hear from you, Judge.
Thank you. Good evening, sir, and thank you very much. And I thank the IAN Pediatric Neurology Subsection chapter, especially Professor Vinayan, sir, to give me an opportunity. And it is a proud privilege to speak after your own teachers, Dr. Rachna and Dr. Shifali, and among the eminent panelists from international speakers also. This is a very light talk, and it is more of emotions rather than a talk per se, which comes from a medical teacher. So I am not that great as a clinician or not great as a researcher, but this is how I have learned it. So we all know that research is nothing but it is a systematic scientific inquiry to validate and refine the existing knowledge and generate new knowledge. And we need to understand that, as Dr. Shifali was also trying to mention, that it is so essential that we have a robust methodology. The study design needs to be really very good. The planning, execution, everything has to be really very perfect for a good research to be published in a reputed kind of a journal. But the main problem that often tends to happen outside many of the institutions are that there are limited centers who train the neurologist formally in the research methodology per se. So although we tend to learn a lot about the patient care, but research methodology is something which we are a little weak at. So, and moreover, the main problem is that there are limited number of pediatric neurologists in India compared to the burden of the neurological disorders in children. And we all can understand that there is a huge burden of neurological disorder, and we are very handful number of pediatric neurologists. But however, the things are not that bad. And over a period of the time, the things have progressed over the last decade. There are very limited number of training centers in India for pediatric neurology, even till today. AIMS Delhi, where I was a part of with Dr. Shefali, started the first DM program in pediatric neurology way back in year 2004, and PGIMR Chandigarh started it few years later. But and you can actually vouch that number of the trained pediatric neurologists in India have been trained abroad. Majority of them have been trained abroad as compared to Indian literature. But recently, a good thing that has happened is that the DM pediatric neurology has been recognized by MCI, and almost nearly 4 institutions have already started the DM pediatric neurology program, including Dr. Vinayan. And recently, another good thing with lot of lobbying around is that DNB pediatric neurology has also been recognized, and we are very, very hopeful that in another 1 year, maybe the DNB pediatric neurology will also come. So this is going to open up a number of pediatric neurologist training centers across the India. So despite a very huge burden of pediatric neurological disorders in India, we have very, very limited number of trained pediatric neurologists. For example, IAN Pediatric Neurology subchapter has around 61 to 62 members, and another organization, Association of Child Neurology, has around 300 members. So this is compared to the burden of the pediatric neurological disorder, this is quite limited number when it comes to India. And with this much limited number of pediatric neurologists, there are limited number of research publications from these trained pediatric neurologists overall. So when I did a random search in one of our reputed Journal of Child Neurology, there were around 88 articles that were published in the current year, and only 9 of them were from India. And when I looked at another credited journal of pediatric neurology, that journal, Elsevier Journal of Pediatric Neurology, we are seeing that in the last 10 years, the number of the publications is definitely increasing, but we definitely need that this steep goes a little further higher. So the number of original articles, number of Indian articles are over 1 year around 8 to 10. But in the last year, we see a good amount of hike in almost 17. And I'm very, very hopeful that with number of pediatric neurology training centers increasing, so we will have lot more publications and lot more of Indian data being represented. Because Indians are ultimately unique, and Indian patients are unique, they are different. We need to understand that demography is entirely different. We of course understand that they have a delay in seeking treatment. They are not able to afford many of the investigations that we tend to order. And in addition, there are lack of appropriate treatment facilities also in most of these, for most of the neurological disorders, and they will have to travel for a very long distance before they can actually see or consult a formally trained pediatric neurologist. And one of the biggest problem in Indian setup is lack of medical insurance, which is a big problem as far as the treatment part is concerned. So how is the research going to help me? Now the research is going to help me in improvement in the fund generations. It is going to improve and increase the manpower. You're going to get a lot of trained people within your system. You can see that the manpower is increasing. You can cut down on the cost of investigation. So a lot of investigations can be done as a part of your research project itself. So as a result of which you can provide a better facility for the patient, resulting in better outcome and improve the quality of the care. So the system overall becomes very, very cost effective. And over a period of the time, once you recognize your institution into a research kind of an institute, gradually you will realize that there is a trust in the medical facilities which Indian population will tend to have. So what do institutes benefit out of this research? Definitely one of the biggest benefit is that they will get staff who are trained in innovative technologies. Like every time a research project comes, the staff who is a research staff is going to get trained in a new technology. And a very, very important point is that you have a dedicated oriented formation of research oriented teams that tend to form in your institution. And one of the biggest things that I always perceive is that good institutions are able to retain and nurture the talent. You know that if the talent, if a student does a post graduation with you, he's an excellent person, you know that you can involve him in a research project, retain that person, and try to nurture his research skills over a period of the time, so that you don't lose the talented people out of your institute. So this is one of the biggest advantage of a research, where you're not entirely dependent on administration to give you job to those who are talented. So people should, the talent hunt tends to go away, brain drain tends to happen, because you're not able to often retain the talents which are there. Institutes obviously get revenue out of the research institution, and it is always a big reputation to be a part of clinical trial for rare disorders, especially like SMA, as Dr. Shifali pointed out, Madam, Dr. Udani, all of them are a part of clinical trial. It's a part of a reputation to be a part of such clinical trial. But the biggest challenges do happen as far as clinical trials are concerned in India. So there are regulatory challenges. It has to go through ethical guidelines. We need to ensure that the clinical trials are they are following good clinical practice. GCP guidelines are formed. A Schedule Y is being followed. In addition to these regulatory challenges, we also have a lot of professional challenges, which many of you will acknowledge, that most of the clinicians have a limited exposure and experience in a formal research training or a formal clinical trial conduction. And most of us are, busy clinicians. Most of us are, have lot of patients. So it becomes really very difficult for you to, steal out time for clinical trial. And most of us are understaffed. So research team needs to be formed. We need dedicated people in each institution to conduct research which are there. But the moment a word called clinical trial comes, there are multiple NGO support groups who are going to jump in and they are going to vouch. But yes, parent support groups do help and they do support the clinical trials for rare disorders which are there. We know that when it comes to clinical trial requirement, it has to go through multiple steps, including, when it is a clinical trial involving a new study, you can definitely talk to Dr. Shifali, and I'm sure she would have faced a lot of problem, getting approval from drug trial, followed by institutional ethical committee, and followed by health ministry screening committee, FCRA, and then trial registration. Finally, the trial needs to be registered in CTRA. So all these steps are definitely very, very cumbersome, and the process of regulatory approval for clinical trials is quite long, and although it is very, very well established in India, but it is definitely painstaking, and it is definitely something which can be done by somebody who is trained as a part of clinical trials which are there. And in addition, suppose if there is a serious adverse event that is happening, then also we know that it has to follow a rigorous protocol. So you cannot deviate from the protocols and conduct any kind of a clinical trial in India. So after having heard all these things, why do you think I should do all these things? But definitely, yes, this clinical trial, or for that matter, clinical research, is going to provide a rapid advance in knowledge. It is going to help me gather relevant information. It is going to minimize the biggest advantage which I always perceive when it comes to research from an Indian soil is that it will minimize unlicensed or off-label use of the drug. And it will also prevent patients to be tried on ineffective medications also. So it is extremely important that we are trying to generate data from Indian soil, so that we know that whatever drug which we are using is an effective drug among Indian patients, and we are avoiding drugs which are going to be harmful to the patients. So, but we need evidence for all of them. But definitely the research helps me discover many new things. It is required for practice change in the practice and policy, and many of us will understand and acknowledge that unless and until you have a data, the government doesn't listen to you, the administration doesn't listen to you, that this is a rare disease. They will ask you for a data, and unfortunately Indian data are so limited. The biggest advantage why I do a research is that because I get a kick out of this doing and conducting a research. So who is going to sponsor my project? Every time I need money, there are good amount of institutions, ICMR, DBT, DST, UGC, CSIR, AICT, as well as a lot of international agencies which are ready to sponsor your projects. But yes, you need to be really trained in how we need to conduct clinical trial. You should be sound with your research methodology. So what are the possible solution to these challenges that we are trying to face? So the solution to the challenges is that you are selecting the sites with trained investigator, and it is also important that you're educating and training the investigators also. So it is, despite the institution being really very good, you need that the investigator should be trained simultaneously. We ensure that, and we are very transparent about it. We maintain all ethical standards. We encourage video and audio recording of enrollment, planning compensation for trial participation. That means you put it clearly on your paper how you're going to handle it. Ensure that public awareness is there so that NGOs, public support comes in support of you conducting kind of research trials which are there. Conducting quality audit, ensuring that there is nothing wrong that is going to happen while you're enrolling the patient. Ensuring that proper declaration of conflict of interest should always be given. So a good research team should have a committed staff. There should be an ongoing training of research staff and mentorship programs. There should be financial resources. The institution should have an accessible ancillary services, including ethical boards, safety boards. So you don't have to loiter around, trying to convince people, that this is the way patient is done. So I'm sure that, many of the institutions have a lot of ethical boards and safety boards. So it is always good to involve institutions which are research oriented. So institutional support and commitment to research is something which is a very, very important prerequisite. And at no cost, we are going to lose the respect for the patients. That's something of a top priority for any kind of a trial, especially. And an overarching commitment to the patient safety and maintenance of ethical standards. So all the research has to happen not at the cost of ethics, the way we discussed in the last moment also. So despite all these things, we know that we have a lot of barriers. We don't have time. We are very busy clinicians. Frankly speaking, we don't have a formal training in research methodology, and we know from the core of the heart that we might not be so good. And above all these things, there is a COVID crisis. You are all the time, forget about pediatric neurology. You are all the time doing some kind of a duty in an adult neurology ward or in an adult kind of a ward also. So many residents of them are posted in different facilities also. And in addition, many of us have administrative responsibilities, and those who are in a medical college will understand and empathize with me that yes, undergraduate and postgraduate teaching is a very, very important part of it. And you cannot forget family. So research cannot come at the cost of the family. So family commitments are always there. So these are barriers which will continue to happen. And despite our COVID or non-COVID, our continued clinical services always tend to persist. But if I'm sitting at a private center, how do you want me to, why do you want me that I should do a research? And how can I do a research if I'm sitting in a private clinic? The most important thing is that ensure that you're keeping the data electronic, make a patient file, archive all the files electronically, give them a label based on the disease, ensure that you have a record of every patient that you are seeing. Ensure that all the neuroimaging and electrophysiology details are stored for every patient that you are seeing. The patient videos, dates are very, very useful for retrieval. It is so important that whatever patient you are trying to see in a private clinic or in a private center should always be archived. And I know of so many very, very good, excellent pediatric neurologists who see, 10, 15 cases of NMDA in a year, and that there is no data that is coming up from those centers. So it is extremely important that we need to ensure that private people who are in the private clinic, private hospital should ensure that they archive the data of all the patients, because you are going to generate a very big chunk of the evidence sitting at your place. So it is so important that apart from clinical care, we need to keep research as one of the priorities. But yes, if you are at a private center and you want to plan a study, you can always approach a state medical college ethical committee for an approval. And I very strongly believe in the fact that it is, even if you are at a private sector, you prove your existence to the world with your research. So it is so important to retain your data, publish your data, prove your existence in the research market which is there. So somebody who is at a medical college where the priority is not always super specialty, it is undergraduation and post-graduation. As in my center, I encourage my undergraduate students to pursue, small projects like STS, ICMR projects. I encourage postgraduates to take up good thesis in pediatric neurology. I encourage them to please present their research in international platforms. So these are some of my students who have presented very, very good works, and they've also published their research in reputed journals also. So it is very important that you encourage and nurture these young talent so that they all take up. There is a dearth of people in pediatric neurology. We need to encourage these people to take up pediatric neurology as some of the specialty. Now, one of the common reasons that I tend to hear is that I tried collecting the data, I tried putting up the research, but it gets rejected. So the only option is keep trying again, and again. Learn the art of writing research paper, understand what editors and reviewers actually want. No journal, frankly speaking, rejects any good clinical paper only because of a poor rating. So I always quote this example of failure will never overtake me if the definition to succeed is strong enough. So this is something which I always believe. I don't get dejected when a paper of mine gets rejected. I always take up all the positive comments and resubmit it. So I'm somebody who never gets tired of rejections overall a period of the time. So what can I do to improve my skills? I can attend regular workshops on research methodology, enroll yourself in a self-paced online courses like research methodology courses of ICMR. It's free of cost, except that they will ask you 1,000 rupees for appearing in an exam if you want a certificate. But it's a very good, wonderful way to train yourself in research methodology. Read journals. Apart from the clinical aspect, see how they have collected the data, how they have analyzed that data. And one of the biggest thing which I always very strongly believe is, please be open to seeking help from learned academic colleagues. I always have a tendency to discuss my projects with my adult neurologist, and I always have a tendency to discuss my projects with many of my colleagues in pediatric neurology. I make my methodology as robust as possible so that the rejection does not happen. So it is very important that even if you are in a small medical college, you are able to provide a good data. So please take help from learned academic colleagues and people like Dr. Shifali, Dr. Swasni, Dr. Vinay. None of them will ever deny in giving you any kind of a help which is there. So with this kind of a positive environment, we actually started that. We realized that West syndrome was something which was not, there was a lot of individual variation in the way pediatric neurologists tend to treat. So we thought that we will develop a consensus among all the pediatric neurologists. The experts were contacted. We conducted a Delphi method by first round and second round, and then finally third round was also primarily done. So you could see that a lot of effort was put into the Delphi method which was there, and finally we met at a final meeting to take a call for the final consensus statement, and the Indian West Syndrome Delphi group was created to develop a consensus statement on management, and this has been now accepted for publication in a reputed journal. So it is so important that we all come together under one roof. So it is so important. Individually, we will not be able to do everything. So with this kind of a positive environment, we also have now started 3 Delphi consensus: febrile convulsions, neurocystic sarcosis, and pediatric stroke. So over a period of, by the end of December, we are expecting that these consensus statements will be there, but obviously we will not have such a beautiful meeting all the experts. It might happen in a virtual meet only. But I very strongly believe that it is networking which is the key solution. We need to work together to develop patient registries. We need to work together to pool the data on various neurological disorders like NMDA, autoimmune disorders like MOG. Individually, we will not be able to see. It is not possible that if I start collecting my data, I might over a period of 2 years might get 4 or 5 MOG. But if I'm collaborating with other clinical researchers across India, I will be able to generate a very, very good data of MOG antibodies. So this is how we need to grow up as an Indian community of pediatric neurologists. And we need to acknowledge and understand that multicentric data have a higher value and higher acceptance rate. It is very sad if you say that I am doing it all alone. It is very, very difficult to probably survive and have our mark in the world literature. So what is the future of pediatric neurology research in India, we need active role of organizations like Pediatric Neurology subchapter of IAN, organization like Association of Child Neurology, which will take up the lead to, collaborate all the researchers. And it is so important, always take the lead and involve other stakeholders. I keep always telling Dr. Shifali, Dr. Naveen, people in CMC Vellore, that if you're starting a project, please involve all of us also. So it is so important that those who are good and sound in methodologies, please involve other Indian in public and then private centers, so that we are able to generate a good amount of data and we are able to vouch for any kind of a change in the policy. And it is so important to create and sustain an environment of research culture. So it is called as mahal banane ki zarurat hai. So it is so important to ensure that you create a research. So you see every patient from the aspect that what is going to finally happen to him. It is so important that you not only give clinical care, but you're also ensuring that his data is retained with you. And it is so important to liaison with an adult neurologist. I meet my adult neurologist every day, and trust me, when I meet these beautiful ladies, I learn every day something or other. The moment they open an MRI, they look at the patient in a different aspect, and every day I keep learning. So I'm blessed with some of the best adult neurologists in my center. So the important take-home message which I wanted to give as an emotional aspect is that please generate Indian data. Please liaison with good academicians, get involved in the research projects, liaison with adult neurologists, remove all your inhibitions, remove that alone you are able to going to do. You will not be able to do. Alone we can do so little, but together we can do definitely so much. So identify your strengths, identify your research priorities. That's so important. Suppose if I am good at NMDA and that is something which is of a great interest to me, I will collaborate with other people. So suppose Dr. Vinayan is interested in MOG, he can start the MOG project and he can involve everybody else. So this is how you have to identify your own strength, identify your own research priorities, discuss with many people, collaborate, make a good project, and ensure that it is being represented and published in reputed journal. Trust me, we badly need Indian data, especially with so many pediatric neurologists now coming up. The priority of research should never get weaned off. Apart from providing and improving clinical care, we have to keep research as one of the priority. And I'm very hopeful that after 1 or 2 years of your planning, we will want our graph of Indian data to steep at least to twofold by 2022 and 23. And I strongly believe that prove your existence to the world which is there. So thank you very much. I bring my greetings from the lush green city of Haryana, from Rohtak. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kaushik. It was what was expected of you, and you put this the things that the need for a research culture. That is clearly you have told the needs of the hour. So we are happy to inform that the IIN also has taken the lead to increase. It's not only child neurology, overall neurology literature from India itself is lacking. So the first research grant from the IIN, it was a competitive grant, has come to child neurology, the subsection of child neurology. And as you rightly told, it was actually a mix of everything, an individual effort from one person, and an institution, a central institution taking the lead like PGAMAR and Dr. Arishi taking the lead, and then the IIN supporting that program, and multiple centers. So it will be on leukodystrophies. It's a 3-year project to develop these things. So that's the way to go. So it is, I think all these things should be there in one go, I think. So with this, sir, anything else to say?
No, I think it's a very emotive and very nice talk. I think he sort of has given the problems all of us face. And I think we should start off with, also consider that even if we don't publish, which, for example, registries are very important. We don't know what diseases we have, what are the age of onsets, what is it, so those kind of things can be easily done. I mean, publishing is always a difficult thing. Unfortunately, we try to publish in foreign journals, which is so competitive and is very difficult to get in. So, we need to also try to publish in Indian journals, because that will raise the standard of, over here as well. I think foreign journals are very difficult to publish.
I think in the long run, we should try to have our own pediatric neurology journal in India.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, so
I wanted to share something. If
definitely.
Doctor, I wanted to share that as a part of that Center of Excellence we have on advanced research on neurodevelopmental disorder, we are creating a registry which is just going to be uploaded now. Everything work has done, in which we are doing for registry for all neurodevelopmental disorders, and I'll be looking for partnerships pan India for working on that registry. It is not one day all the neurodevelopmental disorders are there. So it is now got established here. So we're just getting the software, everything done. So now it will be looking for expansion pan India. So I'll be taking your help for expanding it to all of us pan India.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank
so
you,
I think that's the way to go. So with this, we'll close this session. Thank you, Kaushik, and the last man and the great, the best speaker. The best speaker is coming up, Dr. Lokesh Lingappa. So he doesn't need an introduction for the Indian audience, but there are people who are joining from outside the country. Dr. Lokesh is a consultant neurologist in Hyderabad in Rainbow Hospital. He has done his MD from PGI Chandigarh and DM from Nimans Bangalore, and after that he had his training in child neurology in UK. And his interest is again to show that he is done original paper in developmental medicine and child neurology. That is his greatest contribution so far, I think, Lokesh, on a specific aspect of childhood stroke, which is seen in India. So that is a role model. Lokesh is the role model for whatever Jai Shankar was telling till now. So over to Lokesh.
Yeah, thank you, Union. I thank I and the Pediatric Neurology Subchapter and all the people who are involved in making it successful to conduct this program. We'll quickly look at a few of the examples of strokes and stroke mimics, if possible, in this 25 minutes to see what we learn while we are managing these new children. Manasi, can I have the control of the screen? Yeah. Sorry. Hello.
Yeah. You have to go to the first slide, Mansi.
Yeah. This is the first slide. Yeah. So, so
you can just press home and you will be taken to the first slide.
Yeah. Okay. Home where I'm not able to.
Okay. Let me do that. So 1 minute.
Yeah. Yeah. So next slide. Yeah. So it's just running like this. Can we'll go into the not into the. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it has been transitioned. It has been timed that way. Let us. You say next, and I'll move the slides for you. Let us keep it that way.
Yeah. Sure. We'll just go to the previous. Yeah. Next one.
Yes. 1 minute. So 1 minute. 1 minute. I am not.
We'll go in the non-presentation mode then. Sorry.
Okay, sure.
That will be better. That yeah. Yeah. So when we are managing children with stroke, I think we have a lot of subspecialists who will have to be involved, including the neuroradiologists, neurosurgeons, geneticists, and rehabilitation specialists. So we're all part of our team along with our trainees. So next slide, please. So The stroke in children is quite rare as compared to in adult prevalence, but etiologies are much more varied in pediatric age group as compared to adults. I mean, more than 50% even today, the etiology is unknown, and many of them are triggered by infection-related procoagulant state. The recurrence risk is around 10 to 20%, more so in for 1 year from the initial stroke. What I'm going to present is a few examples where we have learned few new things, which might help our colleagues also to, many of us might be knowing this, but we'll go through few cases which will examine by the next few varied presentations. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is a 2-year, 6-month-old girl who presented with acute onset imbalance, followed by right-sided weakness and slurring of speech, which is all within sort of 2-hour duration she had this presentation. Next slide. During this previous history, she was at birth, she was normal. There were no problems. But day 7, she had a seizure, and ultrasonogram, neurosonogram was normal. At 1.5 years, she had a febrile status epilepticus. And MRI brain done at that time had detected a posterior periventricular nodular heterotopia. Probably that was the reason for her status, prolonged status epilepticus. She also had a CRE1 malformation. The CSF flow study done during that period showed restricted flow posterior to the cervicomedullary junction and normal bidirectional flow ventral to the cervicomedullary junction. So this was reviewed by the neurosurgical team and then was on close follow-up. They didn't have any further seizures. She was developmentally normal by this time. Next slide, please. So on examination, DCS was normal. Her growth parameters were normal. She had mild dysarthric speech with right human facial palsy, hemiparesis of 4/5, and had circumduction gait along with intention tremors and post pointing. Next slide, please. So this was all features were suggestive of a posterior circulation stroke, and she already, next slide. She already had the previous CV junction abnormality or null cherry malformation, which was noted. So when we did the MRI with the MRI angiogram, they were normal. Next slide, please. So both diffusion weighted images, which was done almost after they presented to us after around 12 hours, and the MRI could be done in 24 hours time. So both of them were normal. Next slide. Except for the CV junction abnormality, as you can see, there is a null cherry malformation, significant compression of the cervical cord there with CRE1 malformation, and erosion of dense and transverse ligament hypertrophy was also noted. So the bony scan was also done. CT craniovertebral junction with flexion and extension view was normal as well, apart from these abnormalities. So they didn't demonstrate any other bony structural abnormalities. Next slide, please. So with this cervical cord compression and the clinical manifestation, she underwent foramen diaphragm decompression surgery. Post-op Philadelphia cervical collar was applied. 20 days post-op, she gradually started developing left hemiparesis, which over a period of few days progressed onto quadriparesis, bulbar dysfunction, and speech also regressed. So in between, she had repeat MRI with MRI angiogram, no parenchymal changes. And then we were discussing with all our colleagues, including as Jaishankar was telling, we are discussing with adult colleagues as well. So then we thought the next only thing which will say she's definitely having something which is going on in the posterior fossa, not shown up on the MRI parenchymal changes, but she is debilitated and she lost her ability to walk because of these things. So DSA with dynamic neck positions were performed. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this was a left vertebral artery with head in neutral position, showing a nice flow there. Next slide. And left vertebral artery with neck turned to left. This flow is still well preserved. Next slide. And left vertebral artery, when it turned neck to the opposite side, there is a clear blockage of flow, complete blockage of flow, which is seen. And the right vertebral artery, same thing, head in neutral position, good flow. Next slide. Where the vertebral artery with head in right position, good flow is seen again. Next slide. And right vertebral artery with head turned to left, once again there is a cutoff of the flow. So there is a bilateral cutting off of flow whenever the child is turning her neck to side, because this was done under anesthesia because she was a very young child who was not cooperative. So it established that whenever the child is turning her neck to sides, the vertebral artery flow is cut off and causing posterior circulation insufficiency, which was repeated movements was causing this insufficiency, but surprisingly without any parenchymal changes. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the diagnosis was Bow-Hunter syndrome. The surgical dilemma was she was very young. What next to do? How to help her, because she had become a child, was running around, walking around, and doing all her activities independently. Had become non-ambulant now, and she was not able to swallow well as well. So after various discussions, we went ahead with a C1 lateral C1 C2 pedicle screw fixation under neuromonitoring. So the options were the next slide, please. So these were the screws which were placed in this child. Although this will limit the movement, we'll see why we went for this choice. Next slide. Manasi, next slide. Yeah. Yeah. So Bow-Hunter syndrome is a rotational vertebrobasilar insufficiency, where stenosis of vertebral artery during neck rotation or extension causes this problem. Around 26 cases are reported under 18 years of age. This was one of the very young child, and there is a male preponderance. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll skip this to the two next slides, please. Go to slide 23. Yeah, so pathology is there is a dynamic compression of vertebral artery by abnormal bony structures such as osteophyte, anomalous formation of cervical vertebral canal, tendinous bands, or tumors. They in turn lead on to shear stress, intimal damage, vessel dissection, and platelet aggregation. And the left vertebral artery is slightly more commonly involved. Next slide, please. Yeah. So there are various clinical symptoms which have been reported as part of the Bow-Hunter syndrome in a series of 126 patients. Syncope and near syncope or drop attacks were the most common, followed by vertigo and dizziness. There are very non-specific symptoms: ataxia, cranial nerve deficits, diplopia. So, but here the repeated focus was the child who had Arnold Chiari malformation coming back to you with repeated posterior fossa abnormalities, brainstem abnormalities. Slide 25, please. Yeah, next slide. So provocative angiography is what is required in this sort of situation. It could be CT angio, CMR angio, or DSA. So, but the DSA is the gold standard with head in neutral position and then later on turning into either side. One of the caveat, one of the things we should be very careful is when we are discussing with the team at Canada, which is one of the Gabriel Deuber's team who do a lot of work on the pediatric strokes. So they suggest not to do this kind of provocative angiography until 1 month from the acute stroke situation. So you you don't provocate another episode of decompensation. So here, as in our index patient, the conventional angiography was completely normal. She had almost 3 angiograms, which are normal conventional. Even the DSA in neutral position was completely normal, showing normal flow. So that is how important that in this sort of situation, a provocative angiography has to be done. Next slide, please. So treatment, what they have tried in Bow-Hunter syndrome is observation alone in the symptoms which are very infrequent, avoiding neck, head and neck rotation, cervical collar, and antiplatelet therapies have been done. Surgical treatment in the form of in adults, decompression of vertebral artery has been done, and fusion of C1, C2 vertebrae is a common procedure which has been preferred. In children, fusion is preferred. There is because there is a very high risk of vessel rupture during decompression of vertebral artery because they are very, very small and narrow. Next slide, please. So surgical intervention in Bow-Hunter syndrome, fusion is preferred if there is bilateral vertebral artery compression. In the index child, we had bilateral vertebral artery compression whenever the child is turning the neck to side. So although the disadvantage is the cervical fusion restricts the neck movement permanently, almost 50 to 60% neck movement restriction happens with this procedure, but still that is the only way we could help this child. Advantage, there is low risk of restenosis. VA stenting is not done in the children. So currently the child is walking around with a collar and she is able to climb stairs. She is able to feed well and speak much better. So this is a child who taught us so many things about what are the ways you need to look at when these children present with repeated episodes of stroke, posterior fossa circulation, stroke-like presentation. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is similar when we looked back at the few cases which had presented with completed stroke in posterior circulation, aged between 4 to 15 years. So we had around 4 children who presented with the posterior circulation stroke, and 4 of them had significant posterior fossa bony abnormalities. One with platybasia and associated with Arnold Chiari malformation and a syrinx. Other one with basilar invagination, atlantoaxial subluxation requiring intervention. And other child, as the index child, what we presented had a Bohunter sort of appearance on the dynamic MRA. And one more child with basilar imagination. Sometimes one of the case series presented by Nimans as well in 2014 has published around 6 cases with similar kind of posterior structure, posterior fossa stroke, and you identify a bony abnormality in them as cause of this. Well, the stroke actually brings the bony abnormality to your attention. So these 2 children were diagnosed at admission based on their clinical profile. One had structural abnormality, short stature. Other one has flat occiput. And other 2 children, one of them had recurrent speech disturbances. 1 year, even 1 year later, he started having speech disturbances. MRI, no new changes. Then when we did the dynamic MRA, we could find there was a Bohunter syndrome in this child. And other one child we picked up 1 month later. So 3 of them have undergone surgical intervention, and they have had no recurrences with a follow-up of around 3 months to 4 years. And 1 child is awaiting the surgical intervention. So slide 30, please. So going on to another case, 3-year-old girl with neurofibromatosis on follow-up, now 10-year-old, had left hand preference for some time with intellectual issues and dysarthria. She was slow as compared to other twin requiring some extra support when she was around 5-6 years as well. She had presented with loss of speech and confusion lasting around 5 minutes at 3 years of age. No focal weakness was noted except for the pre-existing handedness and mild right-sided weakness which was there pre-existing. EEG was normal. Next slide, please. Yeah. So if you look at the FLAIR MRI, you can see, I don't know whether it's appreciable. You can see this IV sign here because of the slow flow. And apart from that, you can see there is a very small focal atrophy of the motor cortex here. It's very clearly seen. And as compared to the opposite side, that was causing the early handedness in this child. And the MRI angiogram demonstrated narrowing, significant critical narrowing of the proximal M1. Next slide, please. So with this information, although there was no completed stroke, child didn't have any new deficits. Parents were not keen for any further evaluation. 2 more episodes with similar thing, and a repeat MRI in 2015 showed worsening of the atrophy. At the opposite side, artery also, the internal carotid and the proximal M1 was getting significantly narrowed during this period. Although there are no parenchymal changes which were seen except for mild atrophy. So cognitively, she continued to have deficits. Next slide, please. So continued to have deficits. She had recurrence of similar episodes in 2017, around 3 episodes. With 1 episode was associated with mild transient weakness lasting for half an hour and then recovered. During this period, we convinced the parents for further evaluation and surgical intervention. Next slide. Yeah. So DSA demonstrated there is a narrowing and some mild collateral formation was there a little bit on the left side. Next slide. Next one. Next one. Next one, 36, yeah. So with this repeated episodes and the persistent focal weakness and cognitive deficits, parents were counseled for the revascularization surgery. Both direct and indirect revascularization was done, and in July 2017 and April 2018. So after the second surgery, she had a transient TIA lasting for around 24 hours and then recovered. You can see the collaterals from the external carotid, which have established themselves quite well, and a good circulation which is seen now. So after this revascularization, she has not had another episode of TIA-like presentation. Next slide, please. So thing here is she didn't develop a definitive stroke at any point. It was the cognitive issues which was persistent, and hemiparesis which was there always, the right hand deficits which were there, and there was a progressive focal atrophy which was going on. So based on this, we because of the recurrent brief TIAs, we went ahead with the surgical intervention. In last 2.5 years, she has not had the episode post surgery. Cognition has improved. Mathematical skills, which she was having great difficulties, have improved significantly. Speech has become more fluent, and right upper limb fine motor difficulties, although are persistent. So just next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so there is one good article of this, what happens with the NF1 and what is the frequency of moya moya in these children. Slide 40. Yeah, next slide. So moya moya in NF1, although we say they might be quite frequent, it is seen in large series around 2.5 to 6.4% is the incidence of moya moya in NF1, and mean age of vasculopathy is around 5.3 to 11.7 years. And there is a high association with optic pathway glioma in around 50 to 75% of these children. And at the onset, it can be unilateral in large proportion. Even in the index child, that is unilateral. Symptomatic progression is variable in up to 50% it is seen. Next slide. Yeah, so the prognostic factors are hemorrhagic strokes at presentation, female gender, familial form of onset, pediatric age of onset are all known to be associated with higher risk of progression, and early surgical revascularization as a better prognosis. Slide 43, please. Next one. Okay, so this is one child. I'm shifting the theme. It's another child who came with fetal neurology opinion. First pregnancy, both the parents, doctors had 26 weeks of pregnancy, referred for asymmetric ventriculomegaly. Next slide. So as you can see, this is a fetal MRI. You can see there is asymmetric ventriculomegaly. There is staining. There is a blood there in the lateral ventricle, looking at a germinal matrix hemorrhage. So this asymmetric ventriculomegaly, next slide please. Generally, you have a mild hemiparesis, and so because both the parents were doctors, we explained them risk of mild hemiparesis, maybe some seizures might be there, but generally most of the congenital hemiparesis do have a reasonably good outcome. They will go to normal school. So those sort of outcomes were explained. Next slide please. So fast forward 2 years, 9 months now, the child had flexor spasms at 9 months of age, 4 to 5 episodes of per day, and then went on to develop the Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, failed multiple medications and ketogenic diet. Next slide. And he has significant hemiparesis. He is walking without support, but has very frequent falls. Speech is stopped at bisyllables, and he has not progressed since his milestones have not progressed since much. Next slide, please. The MRI has not shown any other significant changes except for ventriculomegaly and hemiatrophy mild on that hemisphere. No other new parenchymal changes. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So skip to 50, please. Yeah, next one. So we had hemiparesis with some microcephaly. No, previous one. So congenital hemiparesis, refractory epilepsy, epileptic spasms, Lennox-Gastaut, stagnation of motor and cognitive milestones. So with a mild germinal matrix bleed, intra-atrial and asymmetric ventriculomegaly, we were very difficult to explain such severe outcome. So that's when we went ahead with further evaluation. Next slide, please. So, sorry, 51. You're going. Yeah. So the child had a whole exome sequencing done, which picked up a call for A1 heterozygous deletion in the child. Parental testing, both of them were not carrying this mutation, segregating as pathological. You can have autosomal dominant inheritance as well in this. So establishing the etiology for this child's presentation, it was not just a germinal matrix hemorrhage, it was this genetic defect which was causing such severe epilepsy and the severe hemiparetic phenotype. Next slide. So it can have very varied manifestations with the same defect: infantile hemiplegia, delays, migraine with aura, seizures, dementia, intellectual disability, intracerebral hemorrhage starting from antenatal, neonatal, and recurrent episodes of bleeds can also be seen. Ischemic strokes are known to be associated with these things. Next slide. There is a recent paper in 2018 where they have shown that childhood onset focal seizures, status epilepticus, resistant to anti-epileptic drugs can all be due to call for A1. This is much more common than A2 mutations. And next one, next slide. So almost 50% of new patients with focal seizures in this genetic mutations. Porencephalic cysts were seen on MRI brain, co-localized with focal epileptiform discharges. They can be extensive patchy white matter abnormalities which can be seen in these children. Next slide. So there is a subgroup of children who present with this bleeding or porencephaly, but epilepsy as their main clinical phenotype. They have non-specific periventricular leukoencephalopathy and ventricular asymmetry, and they can have worsening severity of the clinical phenotype in succeeding generation when it is autosomal dominantly, especially maternally inherited. Slide 57, please. Yeah. So summary of call 4A1, call 4A2. So antenatal germinal matrix hemorrhage, postnatal intracranial small bleeds can be there. Refractory epilepsy with patchy white matter changes, asymmetric ventricles and porencephaly can all be the neuroimaging manifestations in this genetic abnormality. Hemiparesis with significant impairment, disproportionate to changes on MRI. You need to think of call 4A1 mutations. And epilepsy surgery has been tried in the form of corpusculozotomy in 2 of them, and 1 patient there is a surgical resection that have been successful, but largely they can have very refractory epilepsy. Next slide. Just another 2-3 minutes, Vinyan. So the next slide, please. So that is about call 4A1. This is the last case. Acute onset left-sided weakness 1 day prior to admission in a 9-month-old absolutely well child. 2 episodes of seizures left focal on the same day. No history of trauma, fall or fever. Developmentally normal child. Examination, normal anthropometry, no neurocutaneous markers. Cardia was normal. Blood pressures were fine. Added a small AF which was full. Good eye contact. Left gaze paresis with dense semiparesis was noted. Next slide. Investigations showed there was evidence of some infection going on with 80% neutrophils, 20,000 WBC. Both ESR and CRP were elevated. Rest of the investigations were normal. Next slide. Showed the MR angiogram after 36 hours showed a massive MCA infarct. And next slide. So actually, while we were saying, okay, it's a massive M1 segment infarct, the etiology, we had to do extensive evaluation, but we didn't have any clues in the initial period. But the radiologist called back and said, I'm seeing some abnormality in the around the M1 segment there. There must be some muck around the M1 segment. So let us do a contrast scan. When we did a contrast scan, there was a significant enhancement here, as you can see. Next slide, please. Which was encasing the vessel. So it was significant contrast enhancement here in the basal area. And so because of this thick exudative process, we did a CSF which showed 800 cells and protein of 124, sugar of 34. Cultures and PCR were all normal. So we couldn't identify organism. Gene expert were negative. So 9-month-old, the possibility of sarcoid and other conditions are extremely rare. So we treated as infective pathology. She is improving. The thick exudative process is reducing, and hemiparesis, the upper limb weakness, is still persistent. So stroke as a initial presentation of a infectious process causing thick exudative encasement other than tubercular. So tubercular, you get usually the lenticular striate vessels most often, but such thick vessels, large vessels, isolated without much of packing meningitis is unusual. Next slide. So just one slide here. This is about a condition we may not see very often, but we have picked up 2 children over a period of time. So who presented with previous history of unusual symptoms like poor weight gain and failure to thrive, difficulty in walkings, and then had libido reticularis. One child had Raynaud's phenomena, but was not diagnosed until they had neurological manifestation. This child had ophthalmoplegia. And then when we did the MRI, there was a faint hyperintense signal here in the midbrain, which was explaining her ophthalmoplegia. And because putting all the things together, we evaluated for the etiology. Next slide, please. So this child had CECR1 homozygous mutation, which causes childhood onset polyarteritis nodosa. Here the treatment of choices, usually you have to do immunomodulation, etanercept and other group of drugs which have to be used. Next slide, please. So summary, posterior circulation stroke, we need to carefully look for bony abnormalities, actively evaluate for bony abnormalities. And if you don't find bony abnormalities, your MR angiograms are normal, look for dynamic positional neuroimaging, either MR angiogram if you can get that, or CT angiogram, or DSA, as at least after a month from the acute stroke, you need to do this provocative neurovascular imaging. So that is extremely important for posterior circulation stroke. There are papers which have published saying that it has to be compulsory when you're looking at posterior circulation stroke in children, that you need to look at both bony abnormalities and the dynamic imaging. And if things are not clear, we always a two-way process working with the neuroradiologist helps, because that's how we picked up there was a significant infectious process going on there. So consider contrast MRI in appropriate situations, genetic studies as well, and serial MRI with cognitive follow-up in moya-moya situation. Next slide. To summarize, so stroke where prescribing aspirin is not the complete answer. Stroke with posterior fossa structural abnormality, Bow-Hunter syndrome-like presentation, progressive moya-moya syndrome, sickle cell disease with stroke, infective vasculitis, inflammatory or genetic vasculitis. Thank you.
Again,
the case presentation?
Yeah, you can stop.
So Lokesh, again, as predicted, it was one of the best presentations, because a lot of clinical cases, and then we tried to avoid epilepsy. That was very difficult from when we put it from our end, especially me as one of the organizer. But finally, you were able to bring in from the back door one epilepsy case, at least put the call for A1. But anyway, that is a very good topic. But I know you didn't present your syndrome, no?
No, I think something, that's been slightly, most of the pediatric neurologists today are aware. So these are some things which we just wanted to look at, looking at.
Yeah, so one doubt, that infective vasculitis you told, what was your final outcome of that? You got some infections out of that, or it is?
No, absolutely. That's what our microbiological yield is so low in spite of such 800 cells. We didn't have any gram-positive, gram-stain organisms. Cultures were negative, PCRs were all negative. So I don't know what to trust in this sort of situation, the microbiological evaluations.
No, but you gave steroids and then treated. What was the outcome?
We gave only the initial period, we gave steroids just for 3 days. After that, it was only the antibiotics. And unfortunately, we couldn't avoid whether it was tubercular, whether it will flare up later. That is always the dilemma in this sort of situation for that thick exudative process. So we actually added ATT after 15 days of dilemma. She's doing fine now. She is improving. Last 2.5 months.
Only
we
ATT
completed 15 days
steroids?
of ATT with steroids. Yeah, later on. After 15 days after dilepma, we started ATT with steroids.
No, one possibility is IgG4 related disorders, which can come with that kind of a granulomatous inflammation in that area. So steroids will work in that situation. So any other questions? One question is there, I think. Somebody is asking, what is your experience of management of acute stroke in sickle cell disease?
Sickle cell disease, actually, it's only maintaining the sickling index less than 30. Repeated transfusions, that's the main thing what you do in this sort of situation. Apart from that, aspirin has not much of a role in preventing the repeated strokes in this group population.
No, what's your experience? You have a hematologist near you, no? So you have a lot of cases you see.
No, actually, we are not a sickle belt. We don't see much of sickle, actually. We have had 2 or 3 children with sickle, but not many of them. And one of them was from African country, where we had to do because of moya-moya, we did this one revascularization surgery. But other than that, we don't have too much of experience with sickle in our case.
Just one question, Lokesh. Great cases, really. The NF1, we have a couple of cases with a similar kind of thing, with diagnosed very early. Also given, done revascularization surgery. I've actually started, I do, whenever you diagnose NF, I sort of do the first and don't do repeat MRIs, but first sort of MRIs. I regularly do angiograms. And I think, I mean, we haven't picked up many, what do you think of that? Should we, because this might be something which, you could do some studies to see if the perfusion is reduced and maybe think about preventive or preemptive surgery. I don't know.
Yeah, because what in the largest series of NF1, the incidence, as I said, was around less than 5%, and the progression of this vasculopathy is varied from in the series. Some series have showed only 10% progression after the vasculopathy has been detected. Some series have shown maximum of 50% progression. So another 50%, even in the worst case scenario, will be very stable vasculopathy.
Yeah, so you really can't tell.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can maybe follow them a little.
Follow them up, yeah, definitely, with cognitive evaluation and also the further motor.
Yeah, because many of these moyas, they have a more of a cognitive deterioration, which actually may precede the stroke.
Yeah, that's what needs to be.
Okay, so it is late, so we have to wind up this session, sir. Anything else to add from your end?
No, I think it's a great session. Thank you very much to all the speakers. I think we learned from everyone, right? From, humanism all the way down to unusual cases in stroke. So I think it sort of covered a big, area of pediatric neurology. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would like to formally acknowledge the IAN Executive Committee headed by Professor Pramod Pal and Dr. Gagandeep Singh, and also the technical team headed by Bhavesh and Manasi for helping us, and all the participants and all the international faculty, both of them for joining us today. So it was a wonderful event, and we hope we would like to have further sessions in future. And I would invite all of you to attend the business meeting on October 1st. All the members of IAN Pediatric Neurology Subsection, there is a business meeting as advised by the INEC to have the online virtual business meetings in the near future. So most probably it will be October 1st. We will send you the details in the near future. So hope we will have a wonderful academic and research environment in future. We will all try to develop that. Thank you all. So good night.
Thank you.